Strongest hero? Strongest villain? Who gives a fuck? This guy folds space, drops Rasengan like a nuke, and leaves villains begging on their knees. He demolished All for One and made Shigaraki his bitch. Izuku Midoriya is the Yellow Flash reborn and Japan's biggest walking death sentence. Balls of steel.
Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
The three-pronged knife landed in the middle of the warehouse floor with a sound like a coin dropped in a church. Nobody moved. 41 men stood around a shipping container with rifles in their hands and children behind the door, and every single one of them looked at that little piece of steel spinning to a stop on the concrete, and the temperature in the room went down 10 degrees. "What is that?" said the man with the flamethrower arms. His name was Bosozoku Gen, and he was new. He had come up out of a street gang in Yokohama 4 months ago. He had burned down 2 police substations, and he thought the reason people were staring was because they had never seen a thrown knife before. "Hey, somebody answer me. What is that?" The lieutenant next to him had gone the color of wet paper. His name was Ashigane Toru, and he had been in the underworld for 19 years. He had seen All Might come through a wall. He had seen Endeavor turn a street into a furnace. He had watched his own boss get taken apart by a hero named Night Eye, and he had walked away from that with a smile and a plan. He was crying. He did not know he was crying. "Put the guns down," Ashigane whispered. "What?" "Put the guns down. Put them down. Untie the children. Open the container and untie the children and get on your knees and put your hands behind your head. Are you out of your mind?" Bosozoku Gen laughed, and his arms lit up, and the whole warehouse went orange with the light of it. "It's one knife. One. We've got 40 guys, we've got the kids, we've got the whole harbor bought and paid for." "That's a Hiraishin kunai," Ashigane said. His voice cracked in the middle of the word. "That's his. That's the seal. He's already marked the room. He marked the room the second it touched the floor, and we've been standing here arguing for 11 seconds, which means he's letting us." "Who?" Gen roared. "Who is letting us?" And every man in that warehouse who had been in the life longer than a year said the same 2 words at the same time, in the same flat, hollow, church-quiet voice, like a prayer they had learned as children and hoped never to need. Yellow flash. The air folded. That is the only way the survivors could describe it later, to therapists and to detectives and to each other at 3 in the morning with the lights on. The air folded the way a page folds, and where there had been nothing, there was a boy in a white coat with red flame licking up the hem, standing over the knife, with green hair that had gold running through it like sunlight caught in a river. He looked around the room with an expression of genuine, unhurried interest, the way you might look at a menu. "Good evening," Izuku Midoriya said. 12 children came off a school bus on Route 9 this afternoon. I would like them back, please." Bosozoku Gen fired. A wall of flame 20 feet wide crossed the warehouse and hit the exact spot where Izuku had been standing, and it kept going, and it hit the far wall, and it burned a hole through the corrugated steel and out into the harbor night. And the men behind Gen started screaming because there was a shipping container full of children 11 meters from that fire. Izuku was already at the container. He had not run. There was no blur, no streak, no wind up, nothing for a human eye to hold on to. In the space of a blink, the container door was open, and he was inside it, and the 12 kids were sitting in a huddle in the corner with tape over their mouths, and the youngest of them, a girl of 6 with a rabbit's ears, looked up at him and saw the coat and stopped crying immediately, because every child in Japan had heard the story from an older cousin who swore it was true. "I'm going to take you outside," Izuku told them. He crouched down to her eye level. It will feel like falling for half a second. Then it stops. Hold each other's hands. He touched the container floor with 2 fingers. Outside, on the wet asphalt of the loading yard, 12 children appeared out of nothing, in a huddle with their hands linked, blinking under the sodium lights, and the police cordon 400 meters back lost its collective mind on the radio. Inside, the fire hit the empty container and burst it open like a paper lantern. Where is he? Jen was turning in circles now, both arms alight, spitting flame at shadows. Come out! Come out and fight me like... The knife on the floor was gone. Ashigane Toru had gotten to his knees. He had his hands behind his head and his forehead pressed to the concrete, and he was reciting his own name and his prisoner number from a jail he had been in 6 years ago, loudly, over and over, because he wanted the record to show that he had surrendered before it started. It started. The room filled with yellow light 41 times in 2.5 seconds. There was a sound that the men who survived would spend the rest of their lives failing to describe. The closest anyone got was a hospital orderly in Musutafu General who said it sounded like someone shaking out a wet bed sheet in a very large room, again and again and again. And under it, the soft repeated thud of grown men hitting the ground. Izuku moved through them like weather. A hand on a shoulder and the man was 100 meters up over the water. A palm to a sternum and the man went through the wall he had been standing against. Rifles came apart in his hands into pieces so small they poured. He passed a man raising a shotgun, and the shotgun was in Izuku's left hand before the man's finger finished closing, and Izuku said, "Excuse me," and put him to sleep with a tap behind the ear. Bosozokugen turned all the way around and found himself alone in the middle of a warehouse floor covered in unconscious criminals, and steam, and the smell of burnt paint, and one boy standing 8 feet in front of him with both hands in his coat pockets. "Your quirk is strong," Izuku said. He meant it. There was no edge on it at all. "You could have been somebody. You still can be. It is a long sentence, but it ends." Jen made a noise that was mostly animal and drew both arms back and pulled every degree of heat his body could make into a single point in front of his chest, and the concrete under him cracked from the temperature. Izuku raised his right hand and something formed in his palm. It was blue-white, and it turned. That was all. A sphere of compressed air the size of a grapefruit, spinning so hard the edges of it were invisible, screaming a thin high note like a kettle in another room, and the loose dust on the floor for 3 meters around lifted up and started orbiting his wrist. "Rasengan," Izuku said, and he said it the way a carpenter says the name of a tool. He walked forward. Jen released everything he had, and Izuku put the sphere into the fireball's heart, and the fireball came apart. There is no better way to say it. It did not get pushed back or blown out or absorbed. 1,200 degrees of gasoline flame got taken apart into its pieces and thrown outward in a ring, and the whole warehouse flashed white, and every window in the loading yard blew outward at once, and the fire that had been eating the east wall for the last minute simply stopped existing because there was suddenly nothing left in that room for it to breathe. Bosozokugen went through 2 shipping containers and stopped inside a third. When the police finally came in with their shields up and their weapons out, they found 41 men accounted for, 12 children in a blanket line with hot chocolate, a warehouse with its roof partially removed, and a 15-year-old boy sitting on a crate with a first aid kit, taping up the wrist of a syndicate lieutenant who was sobbing openly and thanking him. Izuku looked up and gave the officers a small wave. "Sorry about the roof," he said. "Now, you need to understand something about the world this story happens in, because if you go into it thinking you already know how it works, the rest of this will keep hitting you sideways. In this world, the criminal underworld does not fear heroes. It respects them, plans around them, insures against them. There are actuaries in villain organizations who calculate all-might response times the way other people check weather. Heroes are a cost of doing business. There is one entry in the books that is not a cost. There is one entry that is a wall. Every syndicate in Japan, every trafficking route out of Kamino, every gun runner from Hosu to Kyushu, every one of them has the same laminated card taped inside the same cheap office desk. And the card says 3 things. If you see a knife with 3 prongs, you run. If you see a white coat with red flame at the hem, you run. If the air in front of you folds and a pair of green eyes looks at you with all the patience in the world, you were already dead when you walked in, so run anyway and hope he is in a good mood. They call it the flee on sight order. It is global. It is honored by people who honor nothing. And it exists because of one night, 7 years before that warehouse, when a boy who was 8 years old walked into a room and made a decision. Izuku Midoriya was carrying a bag of leeks and a carton of eggs when the van took her. It was 4 p.m. on a bright, cold day in February. Izuku was walking 3 steps behind her on the way back from the market, and he was doing what he always did, which was talking. He talked constantly at that age. He talked about hero rankings and support gear and the aerodynamics of Ingenium's calf exhausts, and his mother made small encouraging noises and let him go because she loved the sound of it. The van came up onto the curb. 2 men in ski masks came out of the side door and had their hands on her before she finished turning around. It took less than 4 seconds. She got out one sound, half of Izuku's name, and then there was tape and a hood and the door slamming, and the eggs broke on the sidewalk, and the van was moving. Izuku stood there. Later, much later, he would try to describe what happened inside him in that moment, and he never got it right. It felt like a room he had never opened. It felt like a hand settling over his hand. It felt like some enormous steady presence that had been asleep in his chest since the day he was born, sitting up and saying, in a voice somehow his own voice, older, "We can fix this. Breathe. Mark it." There was a rock by his shoe. Small, gray, ordinary. He had put a seal on that rock 2 weeks earlier while he was bored on the walk to school because he put seals on everything. On lampposts and vending machines and the corner of his mother's kitchen table and the underside of his own school desk. Because his quirk had come in at 4 years old, and this was how it worked. He drew a mark. He went to the mark. He threw the rock. It hit the van's rear bumper and stuck in the gap above the license plate, and the van turned the corner and was gone, and a woman across the street was screaming into her phone about a kidnapping, and Izuku Midoriya sat down on the curb and folded his hands and waited. He waited 11 minutes. He waited because if he went immediately, the van would still be moving, and there would be a driver and 2 men and his mother in a metal box at 60 kilometers an hour, and something in him that had never been taught tactics said clearly, let them arrive. Let them all be in one place. Then take the room. At 4:23 in the afternoon, he felt the mark stop moving. He stood up. He brushed off his shorts. He thought about his mother's face at breakfast, the way she had put too much rice in his bowl again and pretended she hadn't. Then the air folded. The warehouse was on the Camino side of the water, and there were 104 men in it. That number is documented. It comes out of an investigation file that stayed sealed for 6 years and then leaked, and the leak is the reason the story stopped being a rumor. 104 men, a mid-tier trafficking outfit with a side business in ransom in a concrete space the size of a tennis court, with a woman tied to a chair in the middle of it, blindfolded, with a hood over her head so she could hear everything and see nothing at all. They were laughing about the eggs. One of them had brought the leaks in as a joke. Nobody saw the boy appear behind the stack of pallets by the east wall. He appeared behind the stack of pallets by the east wall. Izuku looked at the room. He was 8 years old and 4'2", and he had never been in a fight in his life, and something inside him took the whole room in one pass and laid it out like a board. The 2 exits, the shooter on the catwalk, the 6 with rifles, the 90 with knives and pipes and pistols, the sight lines, the space between his mother's chair and the nearest man, which was 1 meter and 40 centimeters, which was too close, which was the entire problem. They will shoot toward her if they panic, the old presence said, so they must never panic, which means it has to be finished before the first man understands. There was a combat knife on the floor by the pallets, dropped and forgotten, its handle wrapped in fraying tape. Izuku picked it up. Izuku Midoriya has told 3 people in her life what those next seconds sounded like from inside the hood. She heard laughing. She heard a man to her left say something about calling her husband in America. Then she heard a soft whoosh like a bedsheet. Then the laughing stopped in the middle of a word, and there was another whoosh and another, faster and faster until the sound was continuous, a fluttering rush filling the entire room, and under it a sound she could not place at all. A heavy, wet, rhythmic drumming, like the beginning of hard rain on a car roof, all around her, everywhere, and it went on for about as long as it takes to say a short sentence out loud. Then it stopped, and the room was silent, and something warm was dripping down the back of her chair, and she thought in a very small voice inside her own head, "I am going to die now, and I hope somebody finds Izuku." Small hands touched the knot at the back of her hood. "Are you okay, Mom?" She got the hood off. She got the blindfold off. She was looking at her son's face, 6 inches away, and he was smiling at her, that same crooked, hopeful smile he gave her when he wanted a second helping, and his hair was hanging in his eyes. And behind him, the entire warehouse was... He put his hand over her eyes. "Don't look at that," he said gently. "There was a fire. It's very smoky. Keep them closed, okay? I'll walk you out." She kept them closed. She let her 8-year-old son lead her by the wrist across a floor she could feel was slick, out a door, into the cold, clean air of the harbor. And she never saw the inside of that building, and she never for the rest of her life learned what happened in it. Not one drop touched her clothes. The investigators who processed the scene noted that, especially in a paragraph that reads like it was written by a man who had to stop halfway through and go stand outside, 104 bodies. Blood on the walls to a height of 2 meters, on the ceiling in places, on the pallets, on the catwalk, on the chair. The woman in the chair was clean. There was a perfect clean radius around her, a circle nobody had bled into because somebody had made sure of it. Somebody had made 104 separate decisions in 3 seconds about angles. Izuku threw the knife in the water on the way home. He bought new eggs with the coins in his pocket, and he was 200 yen short, and the man at the stand let it go. His mother made dinner with hands that shook so badly, he took the knife from her and cut the leeks himself. And he chatted the whole time about Kamui Woods, and she laughed in the wrong places. And they both pretended. That night, he lay in bed and waited to feel something, and what he felt mostly was tired and a low, steady sadness that had nothing to do with guilt. They chose it, the old presence said, and it was not a comfort and it was not an excuse. It was just true. You will carry it anyway. That is the cost, and you will pay it every year for the rest of your life, and you will still do it again tomorrow if she needs you to. That is what it is to protect someone. Okay, Izuku whispered to the ceiling. He slept fine. He always would. That is the part people find hardest to accept. The story got out sideways, the way real horror does. 6 men lived, not because Izuku missed, he did not miss, but because he had put 6 of them through a wall in the first half second, and being outside the building turned out to be an excellent survival strategy. One of them talked. He talked to a rival crew, then to a bar, then to a fence in Hosu, then to anybody who would buy him a drink, and his story was so bad that for 2 years nobody believed a word of it. He said it was a kid. He said the kid was in 11 places at once. He said the room lit up yellow like a broken streetlight over and over, and there was a moment near the end where he was on his back looking up, and the kid stopped, right above him, hanging in the air, upside down, and looked him in the eye for exactly long enough to decide he was harmless. Underworld people love a ghost story. They repeated it as a joke for a long time. Then the joke started getting details. An arms deal in Nagoya, where every crate of weapons was found the next morning at the bottom of Issei Bay, and every buyer was found tied to the same lamppost with their own belts. A trafficking house in Osaka emptied in one night. 42 rescued girls delivered to a police station in 3 groups over 4 minutes, with a note that said the man with the ledger is in the trunk of the blue car. Sorry about the car. A bounty put on the ghost's head, and then the man who put up the bounty stepping out of a nightclub in Kamino and appearing 12 seconds later in the lobby of the Musutafu Central Police Station, upside down in a fountain with his own accounting records taped to his chest. They stopped joking around the time somebody found the first 3-pronged knife. It was left in the door frame of a syndicate office in Shinjuku, at eye level, with nothing else disturbed and nobody hurt. A warning. Everyone in that office cleared out within the hour, and the men who studied it said the same thing. This is handmade. Somebody sat down and made this with files and a hammer. Somebody is building for this. By the time Izuku was 12, they had the name. Nobody knows exactly who coined it, and the two candidates both went missing inside a year, which is why the underworld considers the name itself slightly unlucky to say out loud, Yellow Flash. By the time he was 13, the order came down through 4 separate syndicates in the same month with almost identical wording, and it was the first thing in living memory that every crime organization in Japan agreed on. Flee on sight. Do not negotiate. Do not take hostages, it makes it worse. Do not shoot at him. You will hit your own people. If he speaks to you, answer honestly. If he gives you the chance to surrender, take it, because he only offers once and he has never once needed to offer twice. Your quirk's wasted on you, said the tiny wrinkled shape standing on the fence post. You've got a body like a wet noodle. You mark, you jump, you hit, you jump. Fine for 100 idiots with knives. What happens when the thing in front of you moves at your speed? Izuku picked himself out of the shrubbery. He was bleeding from one eyebrow and he was grinning like it was his birthday. You're Gran Torino, he said. 1968 graduating class. Quirk, Jet. You retired at 34 with a 94% capture rate, and you were the fastest hero alive, and you're still the fastest hero alive because nobody's beaten your record, and you teach at the Shiketsu satellite program on Thursdays only, which everyone thinks is because you're lazy, but it's actually because Wednesday is when you visit. Shut up, said Gran Torino, delighted and appalled. You've been following me. For 4 months. I never saw you. I know. What Izuku said, and the old man's laugh came out of him like a bark. They fought for 9 years after that, 3 times a week, in warehouses and quarries, and once memorably through the upper floors of a condemned hotel, and it was the closest thing either of them had to church. Gran Torino moved in straight lines at obscene speed, ricocheting off walls and ceilings. An old man turned into a pinball with steel-toed shoes. Izuku moved without moving. Torino would launch off a pillar and Izuku would be gone before he arrived, and Torino would twist in midair and find him standing on the ceiling, and the two of them would fill a room with sound for 20 minutes straight until one of them ended up in a wall. For the first 3 years, it was Izuku in the wall. You telegraph, Torino barked, sitting on his chest. You look where you're going to jump. You look at the mark. That's a tell. Fix it or the first real fighter you meet reads you like a menu. How do I fix it? Stop having eyes. I don't know. Figure it out? That's the job. Izuku figured it out. He learned to jump to marks he had never looked at, tracking the whole field in his head, and Torino watched a 12-year-old develop a spatial map of a 4-story building and hold every mark in it and shift through them in a sequence he had planned before the fight started. And the old man went home that night and sat in his kitchen for 2 hours with the lights off, thinking about what it meant that this was going to be somebody's student, because that was the other thing. The kid was not just fast. Fast was cheap. The kid understood. He came in at 10 years old already thinking 3 moves past a professional, and it had nothing to do with the seals. Torino would set up an ambush drill with 14 dummies and hidden pressure plates, and Izuku would walk in, stop, look at nothing in particular, and say, you put the trigger under the second beam, and the swinging one comes from the left, and you're on the catwalk behind me right now with the practice baton in your left hand because your right shoulder's been bothering you since Tuesday. Do not tell me about my shoulder. And you want me to solve it with speed, but the answer is, I don't enter the room at all. I mark the far side through the window and take the whole thing from behind. How? Torino said. Do you know that? Izuku thought about it. He always thought about it honestly, which was the unnerving part. I don't know, he said. It's like remembering something I never learned. The Rasengan came when he was 13, and it took him 14 months and it broke both his hands twice. He built it because he had a hole in his game and he knew it. Teleportation gave him position. Position without power is a magic trick. He needed something he could put in one hand at any range from any angle that would end a fight in one touch, and he needed it to work on things bigger than people, He got the idea watching water go down a drain, and he nearly killed himself with it 11 times. What he ended up with was a rotating shell of compressed air, spun in 3 separate directions at once against itself, held together in his palm by nothing but a control so fine that Torino once described it as watching a man balance a car on a needle while whistling. It cut. It tore. It did not push things away so much as take them apart along their own seams. When Izuku put a full one into a concrete pillar, the pillar came out the other side as powder and gravel, and there was a hole in the wall beyond it, shaped like a screaming mouth. He never gave the technique a serious name. Because he thought serious names were embarrassing, he gave it a ridiculous one, and he saved it for special occasions. His mother knew none of it, and all of it. Izuku Midoriya is one of the great quiet heroes of this story, and she never throws a punch. What she does is harder. She raises a boy who comes home at 11 at night with his knuckles wrapped and blood on his collar that is nobody's blood she wants to ask about, and she makes him katsudon. And she says, "Was it a bad one?" And he says, "It was okay." And she says, "Eat." And she puts too much rice in his bowl again. She is not stupid. She has watched the news for 8 years. She has read the words unidentified vigilante over pictures of empty warehouses. She has done the arithmetic. She has done the math on where her son was on those nights. And she carries the answer around in her chest like a stone she never puts down. One night, when he was 13, she came into his room while he was making kunai at his desk, filing a prong down under a lamp with his tongue between his teeth. And she sat on the end of his bed and said, "Izuku, that day, in February, when I was 8 years old." He set down the file. "When I was 8, she corrected herself, and laughed and put her hands over her face and cried instead, and he came and sat next to her. "Do you want me to tell you?" he asked. She thought about it for a long time, long enough that the answer meant something. "No," she said, "I want you to tell me you're all right." He put his arm around his mother, and he was already taller than her, which felt illegal to both of them. "I'm all right, Mom," Izuku said. "I promise. I sleep fine. I like who I am." He rested his cheek on the top of her head. "You're the reason I like who I am. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing. You could have been a monster," she whispered. "I could have," he agreed. "You put too much rice in my bowl." She hit him with a pillow. He let her. Which brings us finally to a street in Musutafu on a warm afternoon when Izuku Midoriya was 14 years old and carrying a plastic bag with 3 onions, a bottle of soy sauce, and a tub of vanilla ice cream that was already sweating. He heard the explosion before he turned the corner. The shopping district was on fire. Actually on fire. A bus was burning sideways across the intersection. Storefronts were going up, and there was a crowd 4 deep behind a hero cordon that consisted of Death Arms with his arms out, Kamui Woods looking sick, and Matt, lady standing at street level in full costume with an expression of total helplessness. In the middle of it was a mass of green sludge 2 stories high with a wide grinning mouth and 2 floating eyes, and inside the sludge, up to his shoulders, was a boy Izuku had known since they were 4 years old. Katsuki Bakugo was drowning, not going down easy, either. He was fighting. His hands were firing off inside the sludge, blowing craters of steam in it that filled right back in, and his eyes were open and furious and terrified and going glassy, and he had maybe 20 seconds left. "Why isn't anyone going in?" a woman in the crowd was shouting. "Why is nobody going in? Water hose is 40 minutes out. The fire's between us and him. My quirk's wood. My quirk is wood." Kamui Woods had his hands in his hair. "If I go big, I crush the kid," Mount Lady said. "If I go small, I'm just a lady in a swamp. Somebody give me an option here. Somebody give me." A bag of groceries appeared in front of her face. "Hold this," said a boy in a white coat. Mount Lady took the bag. It was pure reflex. She would think about that for years. How her hands just accepted a tub of vanilla ice cream from a 14-year-old while the world burned. "Kid, get back." Death Arms lunged. The boy was over the cordon. He crossed 40 meters of burning street without touching most of it, and as he ran, he took something out of his coat and flicked it upward. Overhand. A spinning flash of steel that went up past the sludge villain's head, up past the 2nd story, up into the smoke, and disappeared. Then he was gone off the ground, and everyone's eyes went to the sky. 12 meters up, hanging over the middle of the intersection, upside down, one hand out, and the three-pronged knife caught in the other, coat and hair falling the wrong way. Izuku Midoriya opened his right palm and something started to turn in it. The wind changed. Every piece of loose paper in that intersection lifted off the ground and began to spiral. The sludge villain looked up. The two floating eyes went wide, and the mouth started to form a word, and it never got there. Spiraling flash, super round dance, howl, participate formula. Izuku shouted, absolutely delighted, at the top of his lungs. Then he came down. The impact was heard in Shizuoka. The seismograph at Musutafu University logged it, and a graduate student spent a week trying to work out which fault line had done it. The sphere went into the top of the sludge villain, and it did not splash. It unraveled him. 2,000 kilograms of semi-liquid villain came apart into a spinning column of pressurized air and mist, and the column punched down into the asphalt and then blew outward in a ring at ground level. A flat white shockwave of air that crossed the intersection in one beat of your heart. Every fire in a 50-meter radius went out at once. The burning bus went out. The 3 storefronts went out. The oil fire under the bus went out. The little flames in the gutters, the smoldering awnings, the flaming trash can 20 meters down the side street, all of it gone in one breath, like somebody blowing out a birthday cake the size of a city block. The crowd got hit by a wall of warm wind and 40 people lost their hats. The mist that used to be a villain drifted down over the intersection and settled, and in the middle of the crater stood a boy in a white coat with red flame at the hem, one hand still open, steam curling off his palm. Katsuki Bakugo fell out of the air and hit the street on his hands and knees and threw up sludge for 11 straight seconds. Nobody said anything. Nobody said anything for 3 full seconds, which does not sound like a long time until you are standing in a crowd of 400 people and every single one of them has forgotten how breathing works. Up on a rooftop across the intersection, a very large man in a yellow suit stood with his hand halfway to his tie and his mouth open. All Might had come down from the sky the moment he saw the smoke. He had been 11 seconds out. 11 seconds. His personal best on a cold start, the number he was quietly proud of, the number that meant nobody in this city ever waited long for help. He had watched a 14-year-old solve it in 4. Faster than me, All Might thought, and it was such a strange thought that he had to think it again to make sure it was his. He was faster than me in my prime. I was watching for the wind up. There was no wind up. He was at the cordon, and then he was above the target. That is not speed. Speed, I understand. That is something else entirely. Down in the crater, Bakugo wiped his mouth, looked up, and made the choice that would define the next 3 years of his life. He chose rage, because rage was the only thing available. The hell, he croaked, is a spiraling flash super round dance howl participate formula? Izuku offered him a hand up. It's a wind sphere, he said. Then call it a wind sphere. That name is the stupidest thing I have ever heard in my life. That is a dumb person's name for a move. I thought it was catchy, Izuku said, and he laughed. An actual warm, easy laugh in a crater in front of 400 people, with the mist of a dead villain still coming down around him like weather. The crowd erupted. It came all at once, and it did not stop for 2 minutes. People were screaming. People were crying. A man was on his knees. 3 separate phones were recording, and all 3 videos would be up inside the hour, and all 3 would clear 100 million views inside the week. And the thing every comment section said over and over in every language was the same thing. Who is that? Mount Lady stood at the cordon holding a bag of groceries and watched him walk back toward her. And she was 23 years old and a professional hero, and she had to look at her own shoes for a second. She held out the bag. Your ice cream melted. That's okay. Izuku took it and checked inside, and his face fell in genuine tragedy. Oh, the onions got soy sauce on them. You blew out a city block of fire. I know. I'm sorry about the road. He bowed slightly, and then he was gone before the reporters got within 30 meters, and Mount Lady went home that night and sat on her kitchen floor and looked at her hands. Death Arms filed a report describing the vigilante as approximately 14 and got laughed at. All Might filed nothing. He went to the UA staff room the next morning, put a tablet on Nezu's desk with the video paused on a frame of a boy upside down in the air with lights spinning in his palm, and said, "I want him." Nezu looked at it for a long moment. The principal's tiny hands folded on the desk. "Everybody wants him," Nezu said. "The Hero Public Safety Commission has wanted him for 4 years and has never been able to find him. Do you know what the interesting part is, All Might?" He tapped the screen. "The interesting part is that this is the first time he has ever let himself be seen. You think it was on purpose?" "I think," said Nezu, "that a boy who has evaded every intelligence agency in the country since he was 10 does nothing by accident. He wants to come inside. He is 14. He wants to be a hero, publicly, with a license and a name." The principal's smile got wider and considerably more unsettling. "We offered him a recommendation slot within the hour. And he turned it down." Nezu started laughing. "He turned it down. He sent a handwritten letter. He said, and I want you to hear this exactly, thank you very much, but I would like to take the normal exam with everyone else because I want to earn it the same way they do." All Might sat down slowly on the arm of the couch. "He's going to embarrass us," All Might said. "Oh, catastrophically," Nezu agreed. 14,000 applicants took the UA practical exam that year. 1,206 of them were in Testing City B. Izuku Midoriya arrived at the gate in a white coat with red flame at the hem, a leather pouch on his hip, and a paper bag of small coins that he had spent the previous night marking one by one at his desk, while his mother read a magazine on his bed and pretended she was there for the company. He was noticed immediately, and for entirely the wrong reasons, by roughly 200 girls. He was 6'1" at 14, which is a crime. He had a jaw you could open letters with, green eyes that looked at people like they were worth looking at, and a habit of listening to whatever you said with his full attention, which no 14-year-old boy has ever done in recorded history. A girl with a ponytail dropped her water bottle when he held the door. A boy with red spiky hair took one look at him and said, "Oh, we're cooked," with enormous cheerfulness. "You're standing on the yellow line," said a voice at his elbow. Tenya Iida, spine like a plumb line, glasses flashing. "The yellow line is a cue marker. You are early, which is correct, but you are standing incorrectly." "Sorry," Izuku stepped back. "Thank you. I'd have been embarrassed later." Iida blinked. He had expected an argument. He was so ready for an argument. "You are welcome," Iida said, and then with the air of a man doing something reckless, Iida Tenya. Izuku Midoriya. Behind them, a small, round-faced girl with brown hair was doing a stretching routine and talking herself up under her breath. "You got this. You got this. 1 point is a point. Don't look at the tall guy." And she looked at the tall guy. The tall guy was helping a boy with a tail figure out how to sit down on the bleachers without his tail getting caught. And he was laughing at something the tail boy said. And Ochako Uraraka thought, with total clarity and considerable annoyance, "Oh, absolutely not. I am here for a career." Present Mike's voice ripped across the field. "And what are you all standing around for? There's no countdown in a real fight. Goo!" 1,200 people ran. Izuku Midoriya did not. He reached into the paper bag, took out a fistful of coins, and threw them. He threw them the way you throw seed. Up, wide, spreading. 40 coins in one motion, catching the light as they went out over the fake city in a long arc, sailing over rooftops and downside streets and off the edge of a parking structure, and the applicants running past him thought he had lost his mind, and one of them shouted something about not littering. Then he stepped forward and the air folded, and he was gone. In the observation booth, 12 pro heroes and one principal watched the monitor wall. For 4 seconds, nothing happened. Then the entire map lit up. The hell? Yellow flashes. Everywhere. Simultaneously. Sector 4 and Sector 11 and Sector 2 at the same instant, 3 monitors flaring at once, then 5, then 8. A spreading rash of light across a fake city the size of a real one. Each flash lasting less than a frame, each one followed by a 3-pointer coming apart. They were not being destroyed the way robots get destroyed in that exam. Nobody was punching through them. There would be a flash, and a hand would appear on a robot's chest plate, and the robot's entire torso would simply be gone, relocated, sheared off, opened like a can, and by the time the pieces started falling, the flash was 3 streets away. Count, said Nezu, thoroughly enjoying himself. I can't count, said Midnight. Try. 16, 22, 20, no, that's 2 at once. He took 2 at once from between them. Snipe leaned into the screen with his hat pushed back. 29, 34. Ectoplasm's tally sheet had stopped being a tally sheet and had become a series of increasingly large question marks. 39, 44, 48. Time? Said Nezu. Aizawa, who had said nothing at all for the entire duration, looked at the clock and then looked at it again because he wanted to be sure before he said it out loud. 28 seconds, Aizawa said. 53 pointers. 28 seconds. 150 points before most applicants had finished crossing their first street. And then, because the boy apparently had a sense of proportion, the flashes stopped, and Izuku Midoriya reappeared on top of a water tower in Sector 6, sat down on the edge of it with his legs hanging, and started watching the other applicants, watching and helping. Behind you, he called down to a girl with earphone jacks who was about to get sandwiched, and she ducked, and a coin landed on the robot behind her, and the robot's arm relocated itself into a wall 30 meters away. It's yours. Go ahead. He fed points to people for 90 seconds. He redirected a 2-pointer into an alley for the boy with the tail. He caught a falling applicant by the ankle from a rooftop and set him on his feet and told him his footwork was good. He never took another point for himself. In the booth, All Might had both hands on the back of a chair. He finished the exam, All Might said, and then he started coaching. He is triaging, Aizawa said, and something in his voice had changed, and everyone in the booth heard it. He cleared his own objective in under 30 seconds so he could spend the rest of the exam managing the field. He's not showing off. He's working. Nezu, look at his eye line. He's tracking 11 applicants at once. And now, said Nezu happily, let us ruin his afternoon. They released the 0-pointer. It came up out of the ground at the north end of the sector, all 70 meters of it, and the sound of it going vertical made 200 children run in the opposite direction on pure animal instinct. Ochako Uraraka did not run because Ochako Uraraka's leg was pinned under a slab of concrete. She had used her quirk 16 times in 8 minutes, and her stomach was in open revolt, and a wall had come down on her calf, and the 0-pointer's foot was coming down on the building beside her, and the building beside her was leaning. She had time for exactly one thought, and the thought was, Dad, I'm sorry. A coin hit the 0-pointer's chest plate with a tink that nobody heard over the noise. What happened next took 2 seconds, and UA has shown the footage to every incoming class since, and every year the room reacts the same way. Yellow light on the giant's chest, a boy standing on it, one hand flat against the steel, head tilted like a mechanic listening to an engine. He drops through an access seam into the machine's core housing, 0.2 of a second. Yellow light again, this time from inside, and then the sound. 50 miles out over the Pacific, an object the size of a 2-story house appeared 400 meters above the water and fell into it. Reactor housing, drive assembly, hydraulic core, counterweight mass, main powertrain, the entire mechanical heart of a 70-meter siege robot torn out in one piece and moved to the middle of the ocean. And the splash was picked up by a Japanese Coast Guard vessel 11 kilometers away, and they logged it as a possible meteorite. The 0-pointer stopped. 70 meters of empty steel shell stood in the middle of Testing City B, with a hole where its middle used to be, and the light went out of it, and it started to fall. Uraraka watched it come down at her and could not move her leg, and then she was not there anymore. She was 30 meters away in the air, upside down, and then not upside down, and then she was being carried, bridal style, one arm under her knees and one behind her shoulders, through a rain of falling steel by a boy who was walking, not running, and who looked down at her with an expression of total, unhurried steadiness while a building came apart behind him. You are safe now, Izuku said. Ochako Uraraka made a sound like a tea kettle and fainted dead away in his arms. Oh, Izuku said, alarmed. Oh no, was that the concrete? Recovery girl. Is there a recovery girl? She's usually... Hello? In the booth, 12 pro heroes and a principal sat in perfect silence and watched a 14-year-old carry an unconscious girl out of the rubble while apologizing to her. Recovery girl broke it. Give him the recommendation anyway, she said. Give him 2. Aizawa stood up. He walked out. He went to the staff bathroom, ran the tap, looked at himself in the mirror for a while, and said out loud to nobody, "I have to teach that." Izuku Midoriya finished the practical exam with 150 villain points, and in a category UA had to look up the paperwork for, 71 rescue points, which remains the highest combined score in the school's recorded history by a margin that made the second place holder retire from public speaking about it. Class 1A, first week. It went about how you would expect, which is to say the entire class spent 5 days in a state of low-grade emotional emergency. "Okay, so we're all thinking it," said Denki Kaminari on Tuesday morning, standing on a desk. "We're all thinking it, so I'm saying it. That guy," he pointed at Izuku's empty seat, "is not a student." "He is enrolled," Ida said. "Yeah, and I'm enrolled, and I got 11 points and cried in a bathroom." He turned the zero-pointer into a bell. "It's a bell now. It's hollow. You can hit it and it goes bong." "He is very polite," said Momo Yaoyorozu. "That's the worst part." The strangest thing about Izuku Midoriya in a classroom was how thoroughly he was a kid in a classroom. He was bad at English. He got a 62 on his first English quiz and was visibly wrecked about it. He brought 2 lunches because he was 6'1" and growing, and he shared one of them, always, with whoever looked hungriest. He had opinions about the cafeteria's rice-to-curry ratio that he expressed with the intensity of a man arguing before a tribunal. He got excited about other people's quirks. Properly excited, notebook out, asking Tsuyuasui about the tensile limits of her tongue with such genuine fascination that she agreed to a full battery of tests on the roof and came away with 3 new applications for her own power. He also broke the school's speed record by so much that Powerloader took the sensor apart to check it. And every so often, in the middle of all that, the other thing would surface. On Wednesday, a support course student in the hallway tripped and dropped a live prototype, an unstable pressure cell about the size of a soda can, and it went off. It made a sound like a gunshot in a hole in the wall. Every student in that hallway flinched. Izuku Midoriya did not flinch. He was standing between the cell and Mina Ashido before the sound arrived, and the shrapnel went into his forearm instead of her face, and his expression while it happened was the thing people talked about afterward. Not brave, not scared, just level. Absolutely level, the way water is level, with his eyes already tracking the ceiling for secondary hazards. He pulled 2 pieces of metal out of his arm, said, "You should go to the nurse, you've got a cut on your ear," and walked the shaking support student down to the infirmary with a hand on his shoulder, talking to him the whole way about how good the pressure seal design was. Mina Ashido sat down on the floor of the hallway. "He didn't even look," she said. "He didn't look at it. He just knew where it was going to be." Aizawa, from the doorway, said nothing and wrote something down. Ochako Uraraka was in hell, and her friends were having a wonderful time. "He said good morning to you," Mina reported at lunch on Thursday. "He says good morning to everyone." "He said good morning to you, and then he smiled." "He has a face, Mina. The face does that. It's a face thing. It's involuntary." "You put your milk on your rice," Tsuyu observed. Uraraka looked down. She had, in fact, poured milk on her rice. The trouble was that Izuku Midoriya was kind in a way that was completely unfair, because it never once occurred to him that it might mean anything. He remembered that she had said her family ran a construction company, so he asked her 2 weeks later whether the new municipal contracts had helped, and he had clearly read about the municipal contracts, and she had to go stand in the stairwell. He noticed she was struggling with the nausea limit on her quirk and spent a lunch break working out with her, that the problem was breath timing and not mass, and by the end of it, she had raised her limit by 9%, and he was more excited about it than she was. "You're going to be really dangerous," Izuku told her, beaming. Ochako Uraraka went home, lay face down on her bed, and screamed into a pillow for a solid minute while her mother knocked on the door and asked if she was okay. Katsuki Bakugo, meanwhile, was conducting a war against a boy who was refusing to fight in it. He came into that school with one goal, which was to break Izuku Midoriya in half in front of witnesses. He had been humiliated in a crater on national television. 40 million people had watched a boy pull him out of a swamp like a wet cat. He needed it back, so on day 2 he challenged him. Sure, Izuku said. Gym Gamma. Full mats. 14 students watching from the rail because word travels. Bakugo went in first and he went in right. A low blast to close distance, a feint, a real one to the ribs, the reflexes of somebody who had been fighting since he could walk and had never lost to anyone his age. He hit nothing. He kept hitting nothing. He hit nothing for 40 seconds, which is an eternity, and at the end of it, he was on his hands and knees, breathing like a bellows, with sweat dripping off his nose onto the mat, and Izuku Midoriya was standing in exactly the spot he had started in, hands at his sides, coat still hanging straight. Your left knee turns in when you commit, Izuku said. It costs you about 1/10 of a second, and it tells me which way you're going. Like, if you fix that, you'll be genuinely terrifying. Shut up! Also, your grenade timing's good, but you telegraph the double tap by inhaling first. Izuku crouched down in front of him, and there was nothing on his face but interest. You're the strongest person in this class, Bakugo. That's obvious to everybody. It's obvious to me. Bakugo stared at the mat. You could have ended that in a second, he said low. Yes. Why didn't you? Because you're better after 40 seconds than you were after 1, Izuku said and stood and offered his hand. Bakugo did not take it. Bakugo got up on his own and walked out and punched a hole in a locker, and then he went and trained for 5 hours, and then he lay awake at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling with his fists clenched, absolutely eaten alive by the fact that he was not being lied to. He never called him a nickname again. He never used the old ones, not once, not even to be cruel. He said Midoriya or he said nothing, and he watched him constantly, and he denied doing it with such heat that it fooled precisely nobody. You're staring again, Kirishima said cheerfully. I'm planning. You're staring. I will end you, Kirishima. Then came the day of the rescue training exercise, and the bus, and the enormous glass dome, and the thing in the middle of the plaza that came out of the air like a hole in the world. The unforeseen simulation joint. 13 had just finished the safety briefing when the fountain plaza tore open. Izuku Midoriya's head came up before anyone else's, before the light, before the sound, 3/4 of a second early, looking at a spot in the middle of the plaza where nothing was happening yet. Aizawa, he said. I see it. You feel it too? I feel something. Then the warp gate opened and started pouring men. 72 villains came out of that portal in 11 seconds. Grunts, chain gang types, mutation types, a man made of stone, a woman with 6 arms, and at the front of it, a lean figure in black with pale blue hair and a severed hand covering his face, flanked by a mass of shifting purple mist with 2 yellow eyes. 13. Get the students to the exit. Aizawa was already pulling his goggles down. Kaminari, get to a comm. Call the school. Cute, said the mist, and the exit was gone. Down in the plaza, Tamura Shigaraki scratched at his neck and looked up at the group on the stairs with the loose contentment of a man who has planned something for a long time. 11 o'clock, he said. Eraserhead, 20 students, 113 and no All Might. He's late. He's always late. He tilted his head. Doesn't matter. We brought a present. Say hello, Nomu. The thing behind him unfolded to 3 meters. Exposed brain, beak, muscle stacked on muscle in a way that made 2 students in 1A start hyperventilating on sight. That's an anti-symbol weapon, Aizawa said under his breath. That's built to kill All Might. He rolled his shoulders. I'm going in. Buy me 30 seconds and get out. A hand came down on his shoulder. I'll take the Vanguard, Izuku said. Aizawa turned. He looked at a 15-year-old boy standing at his side with a leather pouch on his hip and a coat that had never once looked out of place. And he opened his mouth to say absolutely, categorically, over his dead body, no. And he did not say it. He would think about that for the rest of his career. The exact reason he did not say it. It was the boy's eyes. They were tracking the plaza in a pattern Aizawa recognized because he did it himself and had done it for 15 years and had never seen anyone do it who had not spent a decade in the field. Left, high, exits, threat priority, civilian positions. Where are my people standing? Vanguard only, Aizawa said. You do not engage the Nomu. Sure, Izuku said pleasantly. In the voice of a boy already planning to engage the Nomu, he drew 3 kunai and he threw them into the plaza. They came down among the villains like sleet. One into the fountain lip, one into a paving stone 20 meters left, one into the side of a lamppost, all three quivering upright with their prongs catching the light. A man near the fountain looked at the one by his boot. He was a low-level courier out of the Camino docks, and his name was Sabu, and he had been in the life for 6 years, and taped inside his kitchen drawer at home was a laminated card he had never really believed in. Sabu made a sound like a man stepping on a nail. That's... He backed into the man behind him. That's 3 prongs. That's 3 prongs. That's 3 prongs. Get off me. Sabu's eyes went up the stairs. He saw the coat, white, red flame at the hem, moving in the ventilation draft. He saw green hair with gold in it. He saw the boy look down into the plaza at 72 armed criminals with an expression that had nothing in it at all. No anger, no fear, just an enormous, bottomless, patient attention, like a man reading a shopping list. Sabu's bladder let go. It's him. The scream that came out of him did not sound human. It's him. It's the yellow flash. He's here. The boss put out flee on sight, flee on sight. The mission is over. Run, run, run. And the extraordinary thing, the thing Kyokujiro described later as the scariest part of the whole day, scarier than the Nomu, was that 30 of them ran. 30 hardened villains who had signed up to kill children turned around and clawed at each other to get back into the warp gate. Men were shoving. A man was praying. Somebody was screaming about his kids. The stone man threw down his own arm plating and put his hands on top of his head and lay flat on the pavement in the fetal position and begged. Shigaraki stopped scratching his neck. "The what?" he said. "The yellow flash," howled a woman clinging to Kurogiri's mist. "The kunai, it's the kunai. Don't you know what that means? Don't you know what he did in Kamino?" "He's a child," Shigaraki said. His voice had gone thin. "He's 15. Kurogiri, is this a thing? Is this a thing everyone knows about?" "It is a thing everyone knows about," said Kurogiri, and for the first time all day, the mist was very still. "Then why?" Shigaraki hissed. "Did nobody tell me?" "Excuse me," said Izuku Midoriya, directly behind him. 20 students on the stairs saw it happen, and none of them saw it happen. There was a flash at the fountain, and then Izuku was standing behind Shigaraki with his hand already coming down, and he had crossed 60 meters and gotten inside the guard of a man whose entire quirk was touching things, and Shigaraki had not turned his head. "Please sit down," Izuku said. He chopped the back of Shigaraki's neck. Tomura Shigaraki went into the plaza pavement face first, hard enough to crack it in a star pattern, and did not move again for 9 minutes. The Nomu moved. It came off the ground so fast it left the pavement behind. A 3-meter mass of engineered muscle covering 30 meters in one bound, arm cocked, aimed at the back of Izuku's head. Built and bred and grown in a vat to trade blows with the strongest man on earth, Izuku turned around and put his palm on its chest. "Flying Thunder God, guiding thunder," he said. The Nomu vanished. Everything stopped. 70 villains, 20 students, 1 teacher, all standing in an enormous glass dome, looking at a spot in the air where 3 meters of monster had been a quarter second ago. "Where?" said Kurogiri. "Did it. 38 kilometers straight up in the second layer of the stratosphere, where the air pressure is 1/100th of sea level and the temperature sits at 60 below. A creature designed for shock absorption and regeneration appeared with its arms still cocked for a punch. It had no shock to absorb. It had nothing to regenerate against. Its lungs found nothing to hold. Its blood boiled and froze in the same minute. Its enormous, beautiful, purpose-built body flailed once in the black, and the thin scream of it never made a sound at all, because sound needs air, and there was none. And the thing that had been built to kill All Might died of the sky. It fell for a long time. It came down in the ocean, and it was so cold by then that it steamed. Down in the USJ Plaza, Izuku dusted off his hand. Then he went to work. The next 11 seconds are the most clipped 11 seconds in the entire history of UA's internal footage, and the reason is that there is nothing to see. There's a plaza with 70 villains in it. The camera catches a flash on the left, and 2 of them fold. A flash on the right, and 4 go down against a wall. A flash in the air, and a man with a rifle is disarmed in midair and set down on his feet, sitting with his own zip ties already on. The angles come from everywhere. The light comes from everywhere. There is a rising, fluttering sound like a flock of birds taking off inside a gymnasium, and it goes on and on. and men keep falling over in the middle of running away, and at no point does the boy appear to be in a hurry. Aizawa Shota stood at the top of the stairs with his capture weapon, half deployed, and never used it. When the fluttering stopped, there were 71 unconscious criminals arranged on the plaza floor in a rough grid, sorted by threat level, with the mutation types placed furthest from the students and every weapon in the building stacked in a single pile by the fountain. Kurogiri was pinned inside a metal water tank with a seal on the outside and a very confused expression showing through the porthole. Izuku appeared next to Aizawa and rolled his shoulder once and looked at his students. 20 faces. Absolutely white. Mineta had passed out. Kirishima's mouth was open so wide it looked painful. Todoroki Shoto had ice halfway up his right arm from a reflex he had never finished and was staring at Izuku like a man doing very hard math. Uraraka had both hands over her mouth. Bakugo was gripping the railing so hard his knuckles had gone bloodless, and he was not angry. For once in his life, he was just looking. Izuku smiled at them, and the smile was so ordinary, so completely his, that half the class started crying. "To save the ones you love, you must endure," he said. "You all endured. Nobody moved when they were told to hold, and nobody broke ranks, and every single one of you is walking out of here." He picked up his fallen kunai from the pavement and slid them into the pouch on his hip. "Let's get the students home." "You are a student," Aizawa said. Izuku considered that. "Right," he said. "Let's get the rest of the students home." All Might arrived 4 minutes later. He came through the doors of the USJ at speed, with his fists up and his heart going and the fear of a lifetime in his chest, and he stopped on the top step and looked down at a plaza with 71 criminals stacked in it and Ochako Uraraka handing out water bottles. "Sorry," Izuku said, standing up from where he had been checking a villain's pulse. There wasn't much left to do. All Might sat down on the stairs. The #1 hero in the world sat down on the stairs of the USJ and put his face in his hands and laughed until he coughed blood into a handkerchief, and then he laughed some more. That night, Aizawa Shota sat at his desk at 2:40 in the morning with a cold coffee and a form he had filled out 500 times, and under student combat evaluation, Midoriya, Izuku, he wrote the shortest entry of his career. "He did not need me today. He looked at me before he acted, every time. He asked permission he did not need. He put himself between my students and 70 hostiles, and then he took a body count of my class before he took a breath for himself. I have taught for 15 years, and I have never had a student I would follow. I would follow this one into a building. He is 15. Somebody has to keep being his teacher, and I'm going to have to figure out what that even means, because I cannot teach him to fight. Recommendation, full field clearance. Watch him for the thing he has already decided about himself and has not told anyone." He looked at that last line for a while, and then he left it in. The UA Sports Festival is watched by more people than any sporting event on the planet. And that year, it was watched by more people than had ever watched anything, because the video of a 14-year-old blowing out a city block of fire had done 100 million views a week for 4 months. And every single one of those viewers wanted to know one thing. The stadium held 48,000. 206 million watched at home in Japan. Global feed cleared 900 million. Present Mike lost his voice in the first event and kept going anyway. They had changed the format that year, and the reason they had changed it, Nezu admitted this cheerfully on a talk show a decade later, was Izuku Midoriya. A flat obstacle race is pointless against a boy who moves through space. So UA built something new. The first event was the Long Climb, a 200-meter vertical tower, open-faced, built out of scaffolding and moving platforms and swinging arms and pressure jets, with 360 first years going up it at once. You could not skip it. You could not go around it. The rules said your body had to touch every one of the 8 checkpoint plates on the way, in order, and each plate registered by contact. "He'll still win," said Kaminari. "He can't skip," said Sero. "That's the whole design. He has to physically hit all 8. Izuku Midoriya hit all 8 plates in 19 seconds. He climbed the first 15 meters like a person. Then he threw a kunai up past the second checkpoint, and from that point on, he was simply at each plate, one after another, appearing at the exact height of the pad, slapping it with his palm, throwing the next blade upward on the follow-through, letting the throw travel while he touched the plate, and then folding after it. Touch, throw, fold. Touch, throw, fold. 8 times. He never once fought the tower. He turned it into a staircase of his own knives. He came off the top of the 200-meter tower into the sunlight and stood on the finished platform alone, with 359 competitors still below the 4th checkpoint. The stadium made a sound like a jet engine. He made his own ladder. Present Mike screamed. He made his own ladder out of knives. Listeners, I don't know what to tell you. Down in the pit, Shoto Todoroki came up the tower on a road of ice in 6th place, and he did not look at the crowd. He looked up at the boy on the platform, and his jaw set, and in the stands, his father's fist closed on the railing. The second event was Flag Siege, and it was chaos, and it was the best television anyone had seen in years. 4 teams of 40, 4 towers, 4 flags, a shifting arena with elevators and collapsing bridges, 16 minutes on the clock, and 1 rule. A flag counted only when it was standing in your tower, planted at the buzzer. Bakugo was made a team captain and immediately declared war on the concept of teamwork. Todoroki was made a captain and built a fortress out of a hillside in 90 seconds. Yaoyorozu was made a captain and produced a working artillery piece, which the judges allowed after a 40-second argument. Izuku was made a captain, and he did something nobody expected. He gave a speech. Not a long one. He got his 40 people in a huddle, and he looked at them, and he said, "Half of you are here because you think standing near me is the safest place in this arena. That's fair. It's true." Some laughter. "But if I take all 4 flags myself, none of you get scouted, and getting scouted is the point of this whole day. So we're doing it differently." He split them into 3 units. He put the mobility types on flag transport and the defensive types in the tower and the loud types out front as bait, and he gave every single one of them a marked coin. "If you're in trouble, break the coin," he said. "I'll be there before you finish breaking it." Then he turned that arena into a lesson. He never took a flag. Not one. He spent 16 minutes being the most terrifying support hero who has ever lived, appearing beside his own people to pull them out of collapses, catching a girl who fell 40 meters and setting her down mid-sprint, relocating an entire ice wall Todoroki had built by putting a seal on it and dropping it into a lake, showing up behind Bakugo's push at the exact moment it turned, and doing nothing whatsoever except standing there with his hands in his pockets and smiling. At which point Bakugo's entire 40-man assault force turned around and left without being asked. "Get back here. He's one guy. He's the guy, man." His team took all 4 flags with 2 minutes left, and his own tower was never breached. And the girl who planted the winning flag, a general studies student named Yui with a hair trigger blush, got 3 hero agency offers by the end of the week, because 200 million people had watched her plant it. Izuku Midoriya's personal score for the event was 0 flags and 41 assists, and the pro scouts in the box turned to each other in silence. And the head scout for Fat Gum's agency said the sentence that would follow Izuku for years. "He's not built to be the strongest hero," she said. "He's built to be the one you put in charge." Then came the tournament, and the tournament was where it stopped being fun for the other students. He beat a boy with a hardening quirk in 4 seconds by relocating him into the out-of-bounds gravel and apologized while helping him up. And Kirishima came out of the ring grinning like a lunatic and shouting, "That was so manly! He moved me like a couch!" He beat a girl with a sound quirk in 9 seconds and spent the next 2 minutes explaining to her exactly how she could have won if she had used the acoustics of the stadium bowl instead of firing forward. And she took notes in the ring on national television. He beat Tenya Ida in the quarterfinals in the single most respectful fight of the day. Ida hit 50 kilometers an hour in a straight line, and Izuku stood still until the last instant, and then he was gone. And Ida went past him and hit the wall and turned to find Izuku standing in the middle of the ring with his hand raised. "Recipro burst," Izuku called. "You've got 1 more gear than you're using. Your brother's technique. Use it or this ends now." Ida used it. For 11 glorious seconds, Tenya Ida of Class 1A moved faster than any first year had ever moved in that stadium, and he came at Izuku Midoriya from 8 angles, and the crowd was on its feet. And in the family box, a man in a wheelchair leaned forward with tears in his eyes. Izuku met all 8. He caught the last one with an open palm on Ida's chest plate and set him down on the gravel outside the ring as gently as a man setting down a bag of groceries. "That was the best fight I've had in a year," Izuku said, and he meant it. And Ida stood in the gravel and wept openly, and 48,000 people applauded a boy who had lost. Then came the semifinal, and the temperature of the entire day changed. Shoto Todoroki walked out to that ring carrying something. Everyone could see it. He had gone through the whole festival using one side of his body, and he had frozen 4 opponents solid without ever raising his left hand. And up in the stands, the number 2 hero sat with his arms crossed and burned in a way that had nothing to do with fire. "I'm going to beat you with my mother's power," Todoroki said. "That's all this is." "Okay," Izuku said. "You don't have anything to say about that?" "It's your fight." Izuku rolled his neck. "But you've decided how it ends before it started, and that's usually where people go wrong." Midnight raised her hand. "Start!" Todoroki did not attack, he built. Ice came out of him in a wave, up and around and over, 40 meters across and 20 high. A dome of glacier that swallowed half the ring and sealed the top, thicker than a bank vault, 3 meters of solid ice with him standing at the center of it, and cold fog rolling off his shoulders. He had worked it out overnight. Speed means nothing if there is nowhere to go. Teleportation means nothing without a mark. There was no line of sight, no gap, no surface inside for anything to be thrown at. The crowd went silent. Announcers went silent. In the stands, Yaoyorozu said, That is actually correct. That's the counter. He's found the counter." Inside the dome, Todoroki Shoto stood in blue light and breathed, and for the first time all day he let himself believe it. Outside, Izuku Midoriya walked up to the dome. He put one finger against the ice. "Flying Thunder God," he said. Todoroki's breath stopped in his throat because there was yellow light 2 feet in front of his face. He stumbled backward. His heel caught on his own ice, and he went down on one knee, and he looked up, and the boy was just standing there, hands at his sides, inside a sealed vault of ice, with the light of the dome making everything blue except his eyes. "You built a room with one person in it," Izuku said. "You've been living in one your whole life. This is just the first time it's been made out of ice. Shut up. You froze 4 people today, and you're still cold." Izuku took a step forward. "How long has your right side hurt, Todoroki?" Todoroki's hand came up, and a spear of ice went at his chest. Izuku was beside him. He had not appeared to move at all. And then something in the dome changed, and this is the part that Todoroki Shoto would talk about once, years later, in an interview, and he would stop halfway through and ask them to cut it. The boy's voice changed. It stayed warm. That was the horror of it. It stayed absolutely warm, and something enormous came in under it. The weight of somebody who had stood in front of far worse than a child with ice. Somebody who had made the last decision of a life and made it without flinching, and the air in that dome pressed down like weather before a storm. "Those who stray from the path of justice have no courage," Izuku said. Todoroki's knees buckled. "You are throwing away half of yourself to spite a man who is sitting in a seat 200 meters away eating a bento," Izuku went on, and his eyes did not leave Todoroki's. "That is his victory, not mine. He wins every second you keep your left hand closed because it means he still decides what your body is for. It's his fire. It's yours." Izuku's hand came up and closed around Todoroki's left wrist, and he lifted it. "Your mother gave you the right side. You made the rest yourself. Every hour in the yard, every burn, every time you got up when he put you down, that fire came up out of you, Todoroki. He only ever provided the genetics." His grip tightened. "Your fire is your own, Todoroki. Use it." The dome went orange. It came out of Todoroki's left side in a column, uncontained, blowing straight up, and the ice above him turned to steam in a quarter of a second, and 40 tons of glacier came apart into a white cloud that rolled out across the stadium floor and up into the stands and made 48,000 people scream at once. When it cleared, Shoto Todoroki was standing in a ring full of melt water with flame running up his left arm and steam coming off his right, breathing like a man who had just surfaced from deep water, with his eyes wide and wet and alive. In the stands, Enji Todoroki stood up so fast he broke his own seat. Izuku Midoriya, standing 8 meters away, grinned like a kid at a fair. "There it is," he said. Then he beat him. It took 19 seconds, and it was beautiful. Todoroki came at him with both sides for the first time in his life, and the ring became a furnace and a freezer trading places. And the crowd was making a noise that came through television speakers as static. Izuku moved through it, and every time Todoroki committed, the boy was somewhere better. And at the end, he came down out of the air with his palm out and stopped it a centimeter from Todoroki's chest. Todoroki looked at the hand. Then he stepped back and put his own hand up and said, "Yield." The stadium went insane. Down in the tunnel, Todoroki Shoto stopped and turned around and said, "Midoriya." "Yeah? Why did you do that?" His voice cracked. "You could have won in 4 seconds. You wanted my left side. Why would you make your own fight harder?" Izuku looked at him with an expression that was completely unguarded, and he shrugged. "Because you wanted it too," he said. The final was Izuku Midoriya against Katsuki Bakugo, and Katsuki Bakugo walked out there knowing exactly what was going to happen and walked out there anyway, and the way he did it made him a fan favorite for life. "I know I lose," Bakugo said, in the ring, in front of 200 million people, before Midnight said go. "Don't hold back. Don't coach me. Don't do the nice thing. If you go easy on me in front of my mother, I will hate you until I die." Izuku looked at him for a long moment. "Understood," he said. Midnight said start, and Bakugo detonated the entire ring, and for 6 seconds he was magnificent. A storm in a box, blasts stacking on blasts, using the smoke to kill sightlines, throwing his own grenades out wide so there was nothing safe to teleport into, screaming the whole time. Izuku ended it in one motion. He came out of the smoke above Bakugo with a Rasengan in his palm, and he did not put it into Bakugo. He put it into the ground 2 meters to his left, and the ring came apart, and the pressure ring of that impact picked Katsuki Bakugo up off his feet and carried him 14 meters and set him down in the gravel on his back, dirty and unmarked and out of bounds. Bakugo lay in the gravel, staring at the sky, chest heaving. "You didn't hit me," he said. "You said, don't hold back." Izuku appeared over him and offered a hand. "I didn't. I just didn't need to hit you to win, and hitting you anyway would have been showing off. I'm not going to disrespect you like that in front of your mom." Bakugo lay there for another 3 seconds. Then he grabbed the hand and let himself be pulled up, and 48,000 people came out of their seats. And on the global feed, the moment was clipped and reposted about 11 million times inside a day. He never said thank you. He said, "Next year," through his teeth. "Next year," Izuku agreed. The medal ceremony had one more moment in it that mattered, and it was small, and nobody clipped it except a girl in the stands with her phone shaking so badly the video came out blurry. Ochako Uraraka had lost in the first round to Bakugo and had spent the rest of the day in a strange floating hollow place because she had gone in there and given absolutely everything she had, and it had bought her 40 seconds. She was sitting alone on the tunnel steps when the ceremony ended, and she looked up, and Izuku Midoriya was sitting down next to her with 2 cans of coffee. "Your 40 seconds against Bakugo were the best 40 seconds of the tournament," he said. "I lost." "You made him panic." Izuku handed her a can. "Twice. He tried to blast the ceiling because he was afraid of your rubble plan. I was watching from the box. I stood up." He looked at her sideways. "Nobody else made him do that today. Not Ida, not Todoroki. You." Uraraka looked down at the can in her hands, and her eyes had gone hot, and she was so tired, and 48,000 people were filing out above them, and she said before her brain caught up with her mouth, "You know you're the reason I'm going to be a hero, right?" The words landed in the stairwell and sat there. Izuku blinked. "That can't be right," he said. "You were already going to be a hero. You told Ida you decided when you were 9. That's..." She put her face in her hands. "That is not the point, oh my god. Should I go? No. Yes. I don't know." She was laughing now, hopelessly, into her palms. "Do you actually not know?" "Know what?" Ochako Uraraka looked up at the boy who had carried her out of falling rubble and told her she was safe. who remembered her father's construction contracts, who had raised her quirk limit by 9% over a lunch break because he thought she was going to be dangerous, and who was currently looking at her with total, patient, unguarded attention and absolutely zero idea. "Nothing," she said. "Drink your coffee." Up in the box, All Might watched the two of them on a monitor and started laughing, and next to him, Nezu said, "You know he has been on the Commission's watch list since he was 10. "I know." They wanted to conscript him, quietly, off the books. Nezu's little hands folded. "I told them he would say yes immediately, without hesitation, and then they would have him, and he would work himself to a stump for them, and he would do it with a smile, and they would think they had won." The principal's ears twitched. "And then I asked them what they thought his mother would say. They stopped returning my calls." All Might, who had spent a lifetime being everything to everyone, sat in the dark of the box and thought about a boy at the top of a 200-meter tower giving his own flags away. "I was going to offer him my power," he said. "I know. He does not need it." All Might exhaled. "He never did. He needs someone to tell him he is allowed to be tired. That is a harder job, and I am going to be bad at it." 2 weeks later, Izuku Midoriya went to his internship, and there was never any question about where. "You're late," said Gran Torino from the ceiling. "You live in a garbage heap." "I live in a home. There is a cutlet on the wall, sir. There is a cutlet on the wall." "That's a garnish." They wrecked the apartment. They wrecked it every time, and every time the old man screamed about the deposit, and every time he made them both dinner afterward, and ate it in silence with the news on, and every time it was the best week of Izuku's month. They ran drills through the freight tunnels under Hosu. Torino would bounce off the walls at 300 kilometers an hour, and Izuku would meet him mid-flight without a single mark placed in advance, catching him by the ankle out of the air, and Torino would cackle and swear and go again. "You're getting faster. You're getting slow. I'm 80. You're 79, and you tell people 80 for sympathy." They were in a diner on the third night when Izuku put down his chopsticks and turned his head. It was 8:04 in the evening, and Hosu City was doing what it always did on a warm night, and there had been no siren, no call, nothing on the radio in the corner. "Kid? Something's wrong with the city," Izuku said. Torino set his cup down. "Which direction?" "All of them." Izuku was already standing. 4 points. North, west, to east. They're moving inward. He pulled his coat off the back of the chair. "There are Nomu in Hosu." "How the hell do you—" The first explosion went off 9 seconds later, 11 blocks north, and took the top off a department store. Hosu burned that night. 3 Nomu tore into it from 3 directions, and the local heroes were spread thin across a 40-block radius, and the fire departments could not get down streets that had cars in them. And for 80 minutes, it was the worst night that city ever had. It could have been worse. It should have been worse. There are files with numbers in them. Projected casualties, 1,300. Actual casualties, 11, none fatal. And there are eyewitness statements from 690 people, and almost every single one of them contains the same detail. The light. There was yellow light everywhere. Every time something came down, there was yellow light. He got a nursery school out of a collapsing building by putting a seal on the floor plate and taking the entire class of 26 out in one jump. He caught a falling water tower. He took a Nomu off the top of Endeavor's blind side by relocating it into the Hosu River and holding it under with a hand on the back of its neck for 90 seconds until it stopped moving. And then he dragged it out and left it zip-tied for the police because he had promised his mother years ago that he would stop. Endeavor stood in a burning street and watched a 15-year-old surface out of a river dragging a bio-engineered monster by the ankle, and the number 2 hero in Japan said out loud to nobody, "What is that, boy?" But that is not the part that matters. The part that matters was happening in an alley 6 blocks east behind a restaurant in the dark, where a boy with glasses and blue armor was on his knees on wet concrete with his left arm broken in 2 places and his own blood in his mouth. Tenya Ida had gone looking for the man who crippled his brother. He had found him. That was the worst part. He had actually found him in the middle of a burning city, in a back alley, and he had gotten 1 hit in, and then a tongue had touched his blood and his body had stopped belonging to him. "Aimless," said Stain, the hero killer. He was crouched over him, all rags and scars and bandages, a sword in one hand and a knife in the other, and his eyes were the eyes of a true believer, which is the only kind of eyes worth being afraid of. "You came here for revenge, and you called it justice, and you put on a costume to do it." Stain raised the sword and set the point over Ida's heart. "You are exactly the rot I came to clean. You are a fake boy. Say your brother's name if you like. It will not save you." He pushed the sword down. It went into dirt. The blade hit the concrete and skidded and buried itself in a crack, and Stain's arm followed it all the way down, and there was nothing under it at all because Tenya Ida was gone. Stain came up off the ground and whipped around, and the whole alley was lit up yellow for a half second, and then it was dark again. At the mouth of the alley stood a boy in a white coat with red flame at the hem. Tenya Ida was slung over his left shoulder, breathing, alive, one broken arm hanging. On the fire escape above, a tiny old man in a mask dropped down onto the railing and crouched there like a gargoyle. "You're getting faster," Gran Torino said. "You're just getting old," said Izuku Midoriya. Stain did not move for a long moment. His breath came out in a slow hiss through his teeth. He looked at the coat and at the pouch on the hip and at the three-pronged blade the boy was holding loose in his right hand, and something went through the hero killer's face that had never been there before. Not fear, exactly. Recognition, and a kind of terrible hunger. "You," Stain said. "You are the Flash, the one the underworld fears." "They talk too much. I have heard your name in every safe house in this country." Stain straightened up. "They say you are a monster. They say you emptied a warehouse in Camino when you were a child." His head tilted. "They also say that in 7 years you have never taken another life. Both things being true makes you the most interesting person alive." Izuku knelt down and set Tenya Ida against the wall. "Stay here," he said, and his voice for that one sentence was the warmest thing in that burning city. "Breathe through your nose. I'll be 4 seconds." Then he stood up and turned around, and every trace of it drained out of his face. Tenya Ida, sitting against a wall with a broken arm, watching from 2 meters away, would try to describe that change for years and never manage it. There was no anger in it. There was no fear in it. It was a face he had seen once before in a photograph in a sealed police file that leaked when he was 13. A photograph of an empty warehouse with blood on the ceiling. And he had looked at that picture and wondered what kind of person could stand in that room. Now he knew, because that person was standing in front of him with his back turned, and he had just been carried out of a sword's reach by the same hands. "You murder people using a broken ideology dressed up as justice," Izuku said. "You have killed 31 heroes and 18 bystanders who happened to be in the way, and you have never once gone back to see what their families look like now." He drew a single kunai and let his arm hang. "I will not fail to protect my comrades." Stain smiled through the bandages. "Then let us find out which of us the world believes," he said. He threw everything he had. 11 blades came off him at once. Knives from the sleeves, from the belt, from the boot, thrown in a spread that covered the alley wall to wall, thrown by a man who had been doing this for 11 years and had never missed a target that was still moving. Izuku threw one. The kunai left his hand on a flat line down the middle of the alley, and it met the third blade of Stain's barrage 1.5 meters in front of the hero killer's face, and the 2 pieces of steel struck each other with a crack that echoed off the brick. In the microsecond of that collision, in the half-blink where the sparks were still coming off the point of contact, Izuku Midoriya was already there. He came out of the flash above Stain's head, upside down, coat hanging, with his right hand held out, and a sphere of screaming compressed air turning in his palm, and the alley filled with a sound like a kettle the size of a truck. Stain got his head halfway up. Izuku brought it down on the base of his spine. The hero killer went into the concrete at a speed his own body was never built to survive. The alley floor came apart in a crater 2 meters wide, and the shockwave blew every window out of the restaurant's back wall and lifted a dumpster off its wheels and put it through a fence. Stain's face hit the ground at terminal velocity, and the sword went out of his hand and end over ended into a wall. And every knife in the air came down in the dirt around him like a fence. The whole exchange, from the first throw to the impact, took 1 1/10 seconds. Stain the hero killer, who had ended 31 careers and shaped the ideology of an entire generation of criminals, was unconscious before he understood which direction it had come from. The dust came down slowly. Izuku Midoriya straightened up in the crater and reached down and pulled his kunai out of the concrete and wiped the dirt off it against his coat, and turned it once in his hand to check the prongs, because he had made it himself and he was fussy about it. Then he looked over at the boy against the wall. Tenya Ida was crying. It came out of him in great ugly heaving sobs, the kind you make when your body has finally decided you are allowed to. And he had his good hand over his eyes, and he was saying his brother's name over and over. Izuku walked over and crouched in front of him, and put a hand on the back of his neck. "A true hero does not seek revenge, Tenya," he said. "A true hero protects. He can't walk. I know. He can't walk, and I sat in his room every day for 2 months, and I promised him, I promised. I know." Izuku's thumb pressed into the back of his neck, steady. "And your brother is at home tonight, and he is going to hear about this on the news, and what he is going to hear is that his brother lived. That is the only sentence he wanted out of tonight. Everything else you built in your own head." He tipped Ida's chin up. "Look at me. You went into an alley alone against the man who took your brother's legs, and you got a hit in, and you were still swinging when I got here. There's nothing fake about you. You just aimed it wrong. Aim it at the next person who needs you, and you'll be the best of us." Ida grabbed the front of his coat with his one good hand and held on and sobbed into it, and Izuku let him and knelt there in a crater in a burning city holding a boy who had almost died, and said nothing else at all. Above them, on the fire escape, Gran Torino sat down on the railing and took his mask off and rubbed his face. He had been a hero for 46 years. He had buried a woman he loved and 100 other people, and he had spent decades watching promising kids come through and turn into cops or corpses or cowards, and he had built a whole personality out of expecting the worst, and it had never failed him once. He looked down at the crater. "Nana," he said, in a very low voice, to a woman who had been dead a long time. "You'd have liked this one. He's better than the whole lot of us, and he don't even know it yet." The police came. Endeavor came and stood over the body of the hero killer with his flames guttering, and looked at the crater and did the physics in his head and elected to say nothing. The Nomu were bagged and hauled. Ida went to a hospital and would keep the arm. 11 civilians were treated and released. The projected number had been 1,300. At 11:40 that night, Izuku Midoriya walked out of the alley and stood at the edge of the boulevard with the city glowing orange in front of him and ash coming down like snow. Fire crews worked 4 blocks up. Someone was singing badly out of a broken second-floor window, because that is what people do. A little girl on a stretcher pointed at him and told her mother, seriously, that the yellow light man was real. Behind him, Ida watched him from the back of the ambulance with an expression he had never worn before and would wear for the rest of his life whenever this boy walked into a room. Above him, Gran Torino crouched on the roofline with his hands on his knees and did not call him in. Izuku stood there with his hands in his pockets and the white coat lifting and falling in the hot wind coming up off the street. Red flame licking at the hem, ash in his hair, blood on his knuckles that was somebody else's, and he looked out at the burning city with the still, patient, bottomless attention of a man who had done this before, in another life, in another country, with another name, and had walked out into the fire anyway. Then he took his hands out of his pockets. "Okay," Izuku Midoriya said. "Let's get to work." He worked until 4 in the morning. That is the part nobody clipped because there was nothing in it worth clipping. A boy in a coat that had stopped being white somewhere around midnight, carrying half a hot water heater out of a stairwell so a fire crew could get a hose up it, standing in a knee-deep flooded basement with a flashlight in his teeth, feeling along a wall for a body that turned out to be a rolled carpet. holding a folding stretcher steady with one hand, while a paramedic named Ito, who had been on shift for 19 hours, got a line into an old man's arm on the hood of a taxi. He did not teleport once after 11:47. There was no reason to. The people who needed to be somewhere else were already somewhere else, and everything left in Hosu that night was the slow kind of work. The kind that gets done by hands and shoulders and by asking a shop owner 3 times. Gently, whether he was sure his wife was at her sister's. At 1:10, he found a cat under a collapsed awning on 3rd and got scratched badly enough to bleed through his sleeve. At 1:40, he sat with a woman on a curb for 11 minutes because she could not remember the name of her own street and needed somebody to be unbothered near while her brain came back. At 2:15, he walked 4 blocks with a boy of about 9 who would not let go of his coat until they found the boy's father in a triage line, and the father hit his knees on the asphalt, and Izuku stepped back and out of it because that moment did not belong to him. He kept his own count, not the city's count, which came out 3 days later in a press conference and had footnotes, not the hero organization's, which was built to be read by insurers, his. He kept it in his head the whole night, the way his mother carried leeks home from the market, not making anything of it, not announcing it, just holding it because it was the thing he had come for. 11 injured, 2 serious, 9 walking, 0 dead, 0. He checked it 4 times before he let himself believe it, and the 4th time was at 3:50 in the morning, standing at the back of the last ambulance with a clipboard he had absolutely no authority to be holding, reading names off a list with a paramedic who was too tired to ask who he was. Fractured femur, smoke inhalation, 2. Lacerations, 4. Concussion, crush injury to the left hand, stable. Burns to the shoulder, 2nd degree, stable. That's everybody? That's everybody. Hosu General took the femur an hour ago. Nobody coded. The paramedic rubbed both eyes with the heels of his hands. Nobody coded, man. In that, he gestured at 11 blocks of black skeleton and orange light. Projection out of the prefecture office at 9 o'clock was 4 figures. I know. How do you know that? Izuku handed back the clipboard. Thank you for tonight. Then the ambulance doors closed, and the last flashing light went up the boulevard and turned, and the street noise dropped to the hiss of a hose on hot brick somewhere out of sight. And Izuku Midoriya stood alone in the middle of Hosu with his hands in his pockets and let himself feel it for exactly as long as it took to breathe in and out twice. 0. Then he went and found the old man. Gran Torino was asleep, sitting up on a bus bench with his mask pushed up over his nose and his shoes still on, which for him counted as full formal dress. Izuku sat down next to him and did not wake him. At 5:20, a station attendant came by and told them the first train to Musu Tafu was running, one line, slow, with a bus bridge in the middle. And Torino woke up all at once the way old fighters do, hand already moving before his eyes opened. It's me. I know it's you. Torino lowered the hand. You look like a chimney. You've got a bandage on your ear. I've got a bandage on my ear because a building fell on me, which is a normal thing to happen at work, and if you tell anybody, I'll deny it. They rode home in the second car of a nearly empty train. Torino ate 2 rice balls out of a plastic bag, complained about the seaweed, fell asleep before the 3rd station, and snored for 1 hour and 40 minutes with his mask over his nose and his head tipped against the glass. And every so often, a commuter getting on at Yamashita or Kotobuki would see a tiny masked man asleep next to a very tall teenager in a ruined coat and decide not to sit in that car. Izuku watched the city go by with his hands folded in his lap. He thought about the alley. Not the fight. The fight was done and filed, and he had already put it where those things went. He thought about the sound Ida had made with his hand over his eyes, and about the way a man like Stain gets built. One true thing at a time, each one bent a little further until the whole structure holds weight in the wrong direction. He thought about the fact that 31 heroes were dead because nobody had stopped that man in year 1, or year 3, or year 7. He thought about how many years he had. Somewhere around Kotobuki, the old presence in his chest turned over the way it did. Not words exactly, more like a hand settling on a shoulder. You are counting again. I like counting. You are counting the ones you have not met yet. The train came out of a cut and the sun came up over the roofline all at once. Gold on 10,000 windows, and Izuku squinted at it and did not answer. And the presence let it go, the way it always did, the way something very old lets a young thing carry what it wants to carry for a while longer. By the time he got off the train, the story had eaten the country. It broke at 6 with the morning shows, and by 6:30 it had swallowed every other item on every rundown in Japan. Stain captured. Hero killer down in Hosu. 31 murders. 11 years. Ended in an alley. 3 networks had helicopters over the block by 7. Nobody had anything, so they invented the parts they were missing, which is what happens. And for about 90 minutes, the leading theory on 2 channels was that Endeavor had done it and was being modest. Then the street camera clip got out. 3 seconds. A convenience store's outdoor unit, mounted crooked, aimed at a dumpster in half an alley mouth, resolution bad enough that it looked like it had been shot through a sock. Timestamp burned in the corner, 23:43. Second one. A dust cloud shaped roughly like a standing man. Second 2, the dust moves and something walks out of it, and the something has a coat with a hem that is a slightly different color than the rest of the coat. Second 3, the figure turns a knife over once in his hand, checking it, the way you check a tool you made yourself, and behind him, face down in a crater in the concrete, there is a shape wrapped in rags that the whole country has had a name for since it was in middle school. That was all. No fight, no exchange, no before. Just after, and a boy walking out of the after, and the timestamp. The clip did 400 million views in 6 days. The comment sections did what they always did, which was ask the question they had been asking since a burning intersection in Musutafu. Who is that? The Hero Public Safety Commission called UA at 7:04 in the morning, which meant somebody at the commission had been awake all night too, which meant somebody there had understood immediately what everybody else needed a week to understand. Nezu took the call standing at his window with a cup of tea. It was the commissioner herself. She did not open with pleasantries. She said she had reviewed the Hosu material and she said she wanted to meet the boy. He's tired, Nezu said. He was up all night carrying furniture. I think he should sleep. She said this was not a request. Nezu thanked her for calling, hung up, set down his tea, and laughed. He laughed for 45 seconds. Midnight heard it through the wall of her office where she was grading, and she stopped grading, and she put her pen down, and she sat very still until it ended. 3 months later, she described that sound to a therapist, and the therapist asked her to describe it again. And she said, the trouble was that it did not sound like a person laughing at a joke. It sounded like somebody, a very large animal, walk into a room and being the only one in the room who knew what it was. The meeting was Thursday, which was the earliest Izuku could do because Wednesday he had a physics retake. The commission building in central Tokyo is 19 floors of glass and no plants. Izuku signed in at the lobby desk in green ink, printed his name legibly, wrote student in the box that said affiliation, and handed back the pen with both hands. He was given a visitor badge with a magnetic clip. He clipped it to his coat. He asked the receptionist whether the fountain in the lobby was original to the building or added later, and she said added later in 2011, and he said it worked with the floor, and she thought about that exchange on and off for a year. He waited 11 minutes in a chair by the window, reading a pamphlet called Provisional Licensure Reform, a discussion document, front to back, twice, and folded it and put it in his pocket. And one of the 2 men watching him from across the lobby wrote reading material, took the pamphlet on a pad, and did not know what to do with that. Then they took him up to 16. The room had a table long enough for 20, and there were 9 of them at it. Suits that cost more than a car. A woman at the head with gray in her hair pulled back so tight it looked like part of the architecture, and glasses she did not need, and the eyes of somebody who had spent 30 years being the most dangerous person in every room she had ever been in. Izuku bowed at the door, took the chair they pointed at, folded his hands on the table, and gave them his attention. That was the problem. Everyone who ever tried this with him ran into the same problem. He gave them his attention. Fully, warmly, without fidgeting, without checking anything, without any of the small motions people make when they are waiting for their own turn to talk. He looked at whoever was speaking as though what they were saying might change his mind, and he did not look away. And after about 4 minutes of it, the man on the left with the tablet had lost his place in his own notes twice. They tried patriotism first. A deputy commissioner talked for 6 minutes about the nation, about the 11-year toll of the hero killer, about the debt the country owed him, about how a talent like his, properly resourced and properly positioned, could be the spine of Japanese public safety for 40 years. He was good at it. He had done it before to men 3 times Izuku's age. Izuku listened, and when it ended, he said, "Thank you. I agree with almost all of that." Then, "I want to be a hero," Izuku said. "I've wanted it since I was 4. I want the license and the paperwork and the number and the badge, and I want to do it the way the law says, because if I do it any other way, then what I am is a very fast man with opinions, and I've met men like that, and I've had to put some of them in the ground." He said it without any change of tone at all, and 4 people at that table felt the temperature of the room move. "I'm going to graduate. I'm going to sit for the license, then I'll open my own agency." They tried obligation second. The woman with the gray hair took it herself. She was better than the deputy. She talked about the 6 years of vigilante activity, and she was gentle about it, and she used the word irregular 4 times, and the word illegal 0 times, and she laid it out the way an adult lays out a bill in front of a child who has spent money that was not theirs. The Camino warehouse, the Osaka trafficking house, Shinjuku, Nagoya, the lamppost, 42 rescued girls in 3 groups over 4 minutes. "There is a version of the next 10 years, she said, in which none of that ever needs to be examined. "There's a version where it does," Izuku said. "I've thought about that one a lot more than you have." "Have you?" "Since I was 8. He was still perfectly warm. That was the thing they could not get around. If someone ever puts me in front of a panel and asks me to account for a night in February, I'll account for it, every second. I'll tell them what I did and why I did it, and I'll tell them that my mother was in a chair in the middle of that room with a hood over her head, and I'll tell them I'd do it again, and then whatever the panel decides, I'll do that too. I'm not afraid of the file. I've read it." The room went quiet. Then they tried leverage, and they tried it lightly, the way you touch a hot pan to see how hot. A man near the middle mentioned, in the tone of somebody making conversation, that of course the commission's interest in an unlicensed minor operating at that level extended to the domestic environment, and that a single parent in a rented apartment in Musutafu was not statistically a stable support structure for an asset of this. Izuku turned his head. He did not stand. His hands did not move off the table. His expression did not change into anything you could describe to a sketch artist. What happened was that a 15-year-old boy turned his head and looked at a grown man, and the grown man stopped talking in the middle of a word, and afterward could not say why, and lay awake about it, and told his wife nothing. "Say the rest," Izuku said pleasantly. It was a general observation about, it's okay." Izuku's face broke back into something so ordinary and friendly that 2 people at the table actually exhaled. "I'd like to be clear about one thing while I'm here, and then I'd like to answer any real questions you have, because I know some of you have real ones and haven't gotten to ask them yet." He looked down the length of the table, taking his time, making sure he had each of them. "My mother works 4 days a week at a printing company, and she makes the best katsudon in the prefecture, and she has never in her life done anything to anyone. She is not part of this, not as a subject, not as a factor, not as a line in a memo. Anything anybody wants from me, ask me. I'm easy to find on Thursdays." Nobody said anything. "Okay," Izuku said, brightening. "Real questions?" There were 4. He answered all of them completely and generously, including a technical one from a woman at the far end about whether the marking effect degraded over time. It did not. That was the whole point. He had marks 8 years old that were still good, and he explained why with his hands and got so interested in his own explanation that he asked her whether the commission had ever looked at standardized rescue anchor infrastructure in schools. because you could put a permanent evacuation anchor in every gymnasium in Japan for the price of about 4 support item procurement contracts. And it would take 1 man, 1 year. And it would save children. And would she like him to write it up? She said yes before she thought about it. He bowed at the door on the way out. He thanked the receptionist by name. He returned the visitor badge and the magnetic clip, and the pamphlet stayed in his pocket, and he took the stairs because he had been sitting. The commissioner stood at the window of the 16th floor and watched a very tall boy in a white coat come out onto the plaza below and stop to help a delivery driver get a hand truck up a curb. "Ma'am," her deputy said. "Put the mother on a watch list," she said. The information was on Nezu's desk before Izuku's train reached Musutafu. Nobody knows who put it there. That is not a mystery the story ever solves. And honestly, it does not matter, because the interesting part is what happened at 4:40 that afternoon. When the principal of UA High School closed the door of his office, sat down, dialed a number that did not go through a switchboard, waited for it to be picked up, and said one sentence, 11 words. Very low, not angry. Then he hung up before she could respond. There is no record of the sentence. It is not in any file. It was not in the recording that the commission's own system made of that line, because the recording of that line has a 9-second gap in it that 4 separate technicians have failed to explain. The watch list was canceled at 5:15. The 2 names attached to it were struck. The commissioner sat in her office until well past 10 that night with the lights on and did not sleep properly for a month. And once, at a reception the following spring, someone made a joke about the mouse at UA. And she did not laugh. Izuku got back to campus at 6. Class 1A received him the way they received all news about him, which was with relief and awe and the low, steady unease of 19 teenagers standing next to something operating at a different altitude. Kaminari wanted to see the alley on a map. Ashido wanted to know if he had been scared, and he thought about it honestly and said no. And she said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because being scared is for when you don't know what to do." And Ashido went and sat down. Kirishima hugged him, just walked up and did it, arms all the way around, and said, "I'm real glad you're not dead, man." And Izuku patted his back and said, "Me too." And Kirishima laughed and did not let go for another 1.5 seconds. Ida was waiting in the hall before homeroom the next morning with his left arm in a cast from knuckle to bicep. He did not do the thing he normally did, which was announce himself. He stood in front of Izuku in the corridor with students going around them both, and he said, without ceremony, in a voice pitched only for the 2 of them, "You came. You didn't have to. You came." Izuku shifted his bag on his shoulder. "You would have done the same." Ida was quiet. A first year went past with a tray. Somebody down the hall laughed at something. Then Ida straightened his back and pushed his glasses up with his good hand and said, "Yes, I would have." A breath. "I want you to know that I know that." "Okay," Izuku said. "That is all." Ida turned smartly toward the door and then stopped and turned halfway back. "Also, you are 11 seconds from the bell and you are standing in the middle of the corridor, which impedes..." "I'm going. I'm going." Bakugo said nothing. Bakugo had watched the street camera clip 12 times before he went to sleep the night it dropped, and then he had woken up at 3:10 in the morning and watched it another 9 times in the black of his room with the brightness all the way down, frame by frame, thumb dragging back and forth over the same half-second, the one where the shape walks out of the dust and turns the knife over. He did not look up when Izuku came into the classroom. He looked at his desk. He lit his desk. But at some point during Ectoplasm's second period, Izuku got up to put a problem on the board, and Bakugo watched him the whole way across the room, and the look on his face was not the one he used in public. It was still competitive. It was going to be competitive until one of them died. But there was something under it now that he did not have a word for and would have denied under oath, and Sero saw it, and Sero had the good sense to look back down at his notes. That night, Izuku got in at 11:10. There was a plate outside his door, covered with another plate, because his mother knew he had not eaten, and also knew that if she waited up, he would spend an hour telling her he was fine instead of sleeping. Rice, 2 pieces of fried chicken, pickled radish, the sharp kind, because she had noticed once 4 years ago that he ate more when there was something sharp on the plate and had never mentioned noticing. He picked it up and went in and did not turn on the light. He sat down on the floor with his back against the wall and the plate on his knees, and he ate in the not light of his own room with the city humming faintly outside. And he chewed slowly, and he did not think about anything at all. The old presence in his chest said nothing. For once, that silence felt exactly like rest. The forest was the League's mistake, and it was a very expensive one. Class 1A went to camp in the 3rd week of the summer term. Buses up a mountain road, a lodge with a bad water heater, a training valley the Pussycats had built over 15 years, and a cook rotation that Sato took over on day 1 by force of personality. On the second afternoon, Izuku spent 40 minutes with a boy named Kota Izumi, who did not want to talk to any heroes ever, and who threw a rock at his head. Izuku caught it. "That's a good arm," he said, and handed it back. Kota threw it again. He caught it again. This went on for a while, and then it stopped. And then the two of them sat on a rock above the river, not talking for half an hour, which was the most successful conversation anybody had with that child in 4 years. The Vanguard Action Squad came in at 9:40 that night. In another version of this story, 6 villains go through that camp like a fire through dry grass. In this one, they came over the ridge in the pines 140 meters from the lodge, and one of them peeled off left to start the gas fires, and one of them went high into the canopy, and the biggest one came straight in through the trees because that is what he was for. He found Izuku Midoriya first. Izuku had come out of the lodge 40 seconds earlier alone, in a t-shirt and his coat thrown over it, because something in the air had gone wrong, and he had stopped mid-sentence with a cup of tea in his hand and set the cup down without spilling it. He was standing at the tree line looking up at a slope where nothing was visibly happening. Muscular came out of the black at 50 kilometers an hour with his right arm already back. He was 2.5 meters of fiber mass stacked on fiber mass. A man who had spent a decade building his body until a punch from the strongest hero in the world was a thing he could take on the chest and grin about. He had killed before. He had killed a hero and a hero's wife in a mountain pass in front of their son. He knew, with the total certainty of a man who has never once been wrong about it, that there was nothing in that forest that could stop him. He was wrong about the last part. The first exchange took less than a second. Muscular's fist went into a tree and took the tree apart and kept going and went to the ground and took 2 meters of hillside with it. And Izuku was not there, and Izuku's open hand had touched him once on the left shoulder on the way past. 2 fingers, barely a tap, the kind of contact you make on a friend's arm when you slide by him in a hallway. Muscular came around swinging, laughing, blood already up. That's it? Izuku had already stopped moving. He was standing 8 meters away with his weight even and one hand out, and there was no expression on his face at all. Not anger, not fear, nothing. It was the face from the photograph in the sealed file, the one that leaked, the one taken in a warehouse with blood 2 meters up the walls. "Flying Thunder God, guiding thunder," he said. The forest above the camp went yellow for a quarter of a second. There are 2 accounts of what happened next, and neither of them describes it, because neither of them saw it. What Tokoyami heard from 90 meters east was a single hard concussion, high up, out of the direction of the ridge, followed by a long time of nothing, followed by an impact that he felt in the soles of his feet through the ground. What Kota Izumi saw from a rock ledge where he had gone to be alone with the thing he did every night at 9:40 was the man who killed his parents standing in a clearing and then not standing in the clearing, and then a sound out of the sky, and then a shape coming down through the tops of the pines faster than anything should come down, and then the ground moving, and then quiet. He did not understand what he had watched. He was 6. He understood only that the shape had been the man, and that the man was not going to be anything anymore, and that somewhere below him in the trees, a boy in a white coat was walking through the brush, wiping his right hand off on the inside of his own coat, the way you wipe your hand after you touch something at a market that you have decided not to buy. Izuku stopped at the edge of the crater and looked into it for 2 seconds. That was a waste of what he could have been, he said. Not to anyone. Not sadly. He did not say it was a shame, and he did not say he regretted it. He said it the way you say something that is simply and finally true. And then he was gone, because there were 5 more. Moonfish got 3 seconds. The first second, a kunai went past his shoulder and hit the trunk behind him with a hard tick. He was in the canopy, in the middle of extending his teeth out into a lattice of blades 40 meters wide, and something in his straight-jacketed animal brain snagged on the sound and made him turn his head to look at it, which was the last decision he ever made. Second 2, yellow light in the crook of the branch. Second 3, a hand on the back of his collar. He came down 11 kilometers offshore from a height of 400 meters, and he did not come back up, and the only thing that ever surfaced was a length of leather strapping that a fishing boat out of Chiba brought up in a net 8 months later and threw back without looking at it. Dabi was where it slowed down, and it did not slow much. But it slowed enough to show the difference between men who came for a paycheck and a man who had done his homework. He had been watching the yellow light move through the forest for 11 seconds, and he had already stopped thinking about the mission. He had spread his fire in the first half second after he understood, and he had done it right. Not a bolt, not a lance, a wall. Blue, wide, low, filling the whole gap between the ridge and the camp, 200 degrees hotter than anything else on that mountain, and he kept it moving, sweeping it in a rolling fan so that nothing stayed still long enough to be a place, cutting every sight line, filling every gap where a knife could land. That was correct. It was better than correct. Of everything anyone tried on Izuku Midoriya between the ages of 8 and 16, Dabi's 30 seconds in that forest was the third best answer anyone came up with. The problem is that fire needs fuel, and fuel needs to hold still. For 30 seconds, Izuku worked. He came in low, and Dabi burned the ground out from under the approach. He came in from the trees, and Dabi took the trees. He put a kunai over the top, and Dabi caught it in the air and boiled the paint off it, which is a hard thing to do. And Izuku actually said, "Oh, nice," out loud in the middle of it, delighted, genuinely, because he had never seen anyone do that before. Then he stopped moving. He stood in a burning clearing with his hands at his sides and let Dabi look at him, and Dabi understood immediately that he was being given something and did not care, because he had one shot and he knew it. He pulled everything into it. Both arms out, the whole valley of blue converging inward, a cone of fire 11 meters wide, narrowing to a point. The hottest thing in the prefecture, Izuku threw one kunai straight down the middle of it. Then he went through after it. What came out the far side of the inferno was Izuku Midoriya with Dabi in his left hand, lifted clean off the ground by the front of his own coat. The blue fire was still burning. It was burning on Izuku's forearm and up his sleeve and along the side of his neck. And he gave it no attention whatsoever. None. Not a flicker, and that was the thing Dabi never got over. Not being caught, not being lifted, but the fact that his fire was on the boy's arm and the boy was not thinking about it. They looked at each other for one moment. Whatever passed between them in that moment, Dabi carried for the rest of his life, and he never told anybody what it was. Then Izuku relocated him, not to safety, to the forest floor, 30 meters below, at the velocity of the drop, face down, coat smoking, arms out. Alive. Left alive because a body with a mouth is worth 11 raid warrants. And Izuku Midoriya had been doing this since he was 8, and he knew exactly what a mouth was worth. His left arm was never good for much after that night. Toga found Izuku by walking straight up to him. She came out of the brush with her knives out and her head on one side and stood 2 meters from a boy with his sleeve on fire and one villain unconscious behind him. And she breathed in, and something happened in her face. "You smell interesting," she said. Izuku put out his sleeve with his other hand. She looked at him a moment longer, said, "Bye," and ran. He let her go. Later, there was a hearing about that, and he answered it the same way he answered everything, which was completely. She was moving away from the students at speed. She was no threat to anyone in that forest. in the next 10 minutes, and there were 4 hostiles left inside the perimeter, and one of them was a man who compressed people into objects the size of a marble. He said if the panel wanted to tell him he had picked wrong, he would listen. The panel did not want to tell him that. Mr. Compress tried his quirk. It was the only thing he had, and he was very good with it. And he had taken heroes with it, and he got it off clean. A snap of the wrist, a flourish, a small glass bead spinning up into the air over the clearing with a 15-year-old boy inside it. He caught it in his palm and bowed to nobody, because there was nobody left to bow to. Then the marble opened. Izuku stepped out of it inside his guard, close enough to smell his cologne, and Mr. Compress had one instant to understand that the interior of his own quirk had a floor in it now. And then a tap behind the ear put him to sleep standing up. He was found at 10:12 sitting against a tree with his hat on his knee and his marbles in a neat pile at his feet, sorted by size, largest at the bottom. Each one contained a member of the support crew he had swallowed on the way in. All 4 came out fine. Spinner never engaged at all. He was in the pines on the north slope holding a sword he had made himself out of 19 kitchen knives, and he watched the yellow light happen. He watched it flare on his left, and then behind him, and then above, and then further off, and every time it flared, one of the voices on the squad channel stopped mid-word. Magni's voice stopped. Then the 2 Yakuza contractors who had come along for the money. Then Compress, who was mid-sentence, saying there is something extremely wrong with... Spinner stood in the trees with his heart going like a bird in a box. Then he laid the sword down on the pine needles and put his hands on top of his head and got down on his knees facing away from the camp and made himself as still as a man can make himself. He stayed that way for 2 hours and 11 minutes until a pro hero with a flashlight found him and had to say his own name 3 times before the lizard-faced villain would look up. It was the same choice Ashigane Toru made in a warehouse in Kamino 7 years earlier, for the same reason, out of the same laminated card. Of the 6 members of the Vanguard Action Squad, the 2 who lived without permanent injury were the one who ran and the one who knelt. Nobody was taken. Nobody died. Not one student in Class 1A was hurt worse than a twisted ankle. Jiro got jumping off a porch. Most of them slept through it. That is the part that made it into a lecture at 3 separate hero academies within 2 years. And it made it in because Aizawa put it in his report in exactly those words. The operation was neutralized at 9:47. The general alarm was raised at 9:52 and canceled at 9:56. 11 students never woke. Shoji found Izuku at the forest edge afterward, standing in the gap between 2 pines looking out into the black, between the trees with his left sleeve gone and his forearm shining with burn ointment he had put on himself out of a first aid tin, one arm still trailing a thread of smoke off the shoulder seam. Shoji stopped because footsteps in the pine litter are loud, and because he did not want to be the shape that came up behind that boy without a sound. Izuku turned around when he heard them. And for about a quarter of a second, before he knew who it was, Shoji Meizo, who has 6 arms and can make any of them an ear, and who is not a nervous person, saw the other face. Not the one from the common room. Not the one that asked about the tensile limits of Tsuyu's tongue with a notebook out. The one with no floor in it. Then the door closed and the warm one came back. "Is everyone accounted for?" Izuku said. "I think so." "Check again." Shoji went and checked again. Everyone was accounted for. The pros came up the road at 5:40 in the morning for containment. They walked through a forest of secured hostiles, one against a tree with his marbles sorted, one on his knees in the pines, one face down in a crater at the base of a slope with his arms zip-tied behind him at the elbows because Izuku had judged the wrists insufficient. There was a list on the lodge's kitchen table, handwritten, with locations by grid reference and a note at the bottom. "The one in the pines gave up before I got to him. Please put that in the file. It should count for something." And there was the other crater. The team lead was a man named Kuwahara out of the Nagano district office, 11 years in, no nonsense, who had been to 80 crime scenes. He stood at the edge of that one for a long moment with his hat in both hands. He did the drop physics in his head and then did them again, and he looked up at the gap in the canopy which was not a gap in the canopy, so much as a hole punched through 11 meters of pine. And he looked back down. Then he put his hat back on. He did not say anything to anyone. He wrote, deceased adult male, matches. Warrant 771B, impact trauma, cause consistent with fall from altitude, and closed the pad. At 6:20, Aizawa found Izuku sitting on a log outside the burned-out kitchen with a can of peaches. Because the kitchen was gone, and the peaches were what there was, Aizawa did not say anything. He sat down on the other end of the log with his capture weapon hanging loose and his eyes bloodshot in a way that had nothing to do with his quirk. Izuku held out the can. Aizawa took a peach out of it with his fingers and ate it, and they sat there in the gray light with the smell of wet ash coming off the lodge and a bird starting up somewhere to the east. And neither of them said anything for a full minute. I broke the promise, Izuku said, not asking to be forgiven, not looking for anything, putting it on the record because it belonged on the record. Aizawa did not ask which promise. He had read the same file everyone else had read, and he had read it more times. Did you have another option? Izuku thought about it. He always thought about it honestly, which was the part that got to people. For most of them, yes. For muscular, Izuku looked out across the valley, toward the slope, where you could just see a place where the treetops did not match. He would have gone through every child in this forest to finish, he said. He's done it before. He did it in a mountain pass 4 years ago, and there's a kid asleep in that lodge who watched it. He does not stop when you hurt him. He does not stop when he's losing, and he cannot be held. There's no cell in this country rated for him, and everybody knows it, which is why he was out. A beat. So, no. Aizawa finished his peach. He wiped his fingers on his trousers. You made a decision under combat conditions to save lives, he said. That is what heroes do. He stood up. Log it. All of it. On my desk before Friday. He walked away down the path and did not look back and did not say, well done, because well done was not the right thing, and he knew it. He said the only right thing, which was, it happened, it will be written down, and it is done. Izuku sat on the log and finished the peaches and watched the sun come up over the ridge, and at some point, Kodaizumi came and sat down at the other end of the log without a word and did not look at him and stayed there for 20 minutes and left. Something started in that kid that night. It took him 4 years to find a name for it, and when he found it, he did not tell anybody either. Katsuki Bakugo disappeared 11 days later at 8:06 in the evening from the middle of Musutafu, out of a group of 4 students walking back from a convenience store in the space of one warp gate opening and closing. The League wanted a demonstration. That was the whole point of it. Not the boy. The boy was a means. They wanted the country to watch the heroes fail to protect their own students on camera and understand that the failure was structural, and Shigaraki had planned it for 4 months, and it was, on paper, a good plan. It survived 11 minutes, because 2 days after the camp, in the courtyard of the dorm building at 9 at night, Izuku Midoriya had walked up to Bakugo and held out a 5-yen coin. Bakugo looked at it. What? Break it if you need me. I don't need... I know. Izuku put it in his hand anyway, closing Bakugo's fingers over it with both of his, which was an outrageous thing to do to Katsuki Bakugo, and he did it without any hesitation at all. You're the strongest person in our year, and you're going to be the strongest person in the country, and none of that has anything to do with this. This is arithmetic I do for everybody. Kirishima's got 1, Uraraka's got 2, because she loses things. I heard that, so hold on to it. And don't break it, and I hope you never do. Bakugo said something extremely rude and walked off with the coin in his fist. In public, he was clear about it. He told Kirishima he had thrown it in the river. He told Sero it was in the trash. He said at volume in the common room that he did not need a leash and that anybody who needed a leash should consider a different career. In private, that night, alone in his room with the door locked, he sat on the end of his bed for 11 minutes with the coin in both hands, turning it over and over. Then he got a needle and thread out of the drawer, and he opened the lining of the left gauntlet of his costume, and he sewed the coin into it, up under the wrist plate where nothing would knock it loose. He did it badly. His stitching was terrible. He redid it 3 times until it was tight, and he put the gauntlet back on the rack, and he lay down and stared at the ceiling. He never mentioned it to anyone, ever. He had it on him in the warehouse in Kamino, on the floor, on his knees, with his hands bound at the wrists behind him, and a man made of gas standing over him, and a monster in the corner of the room being asked to join. He got the wrist plate open with his teeth. That took 4 minutes. He got the coin out of the lining with his tongue and his molars and had it in his mouth for 6 minutes and 11 seconds. He did not break it. He lay there with it between his teeth and did not break it, because the day he broke it was the day he had lost. And Katsuki Bakugo had made a decision about losing when he was 6 years old and had not revisited it since. Izuku came anyway. He was on the phone to Gran Torino at 8:17. They took Bakugo. Who's they? And how do you? Warp gate on Aoyama Street 11 minutes ago. It's the League. Shigaraki wants a hostage he can put on camera. A pause with paper moving in it. I need 3 people who don't ask questions and can hold a perimeter, not heroes with agencies. Retired. Gran Torino did not say this is a police matter. He was 79 years old and he had been at this for 46 years, and he knew what he had on the other end of that line. Give me 11 minutes. He called a woman named Sasaki Ren, who had retired at 41 with a bad hip and a quirk that made air heavy, and who had 2 3-pronged kunai stuck in the plaster of her kitchen wall above the stove, where they'd been for 8 years, because a 12-year-old had put them there during a sparring session, and she had decided she would rather leave them in the wall for the rest of her life than admit out loud that she had lost track of a child in her own apartment. She looked at the wall while she listened. Tell him I'm in. She said the League's safe house network came apart before midnight, and the thing nobody outside a very small room ever understood is that it did not come apart because of intelligence work. There was no informant, no wiretap. Nobody flipped. It came apart because of a paper bag of coins. Izuku Midoriya had been marking things since he was 4 years old. Lampposts, vending machines, the underside of school desks, the corner of his mother's kitchen table. Bus shelters, storm drains, the third stair of a fire escape in Shinjuku, the frame of a pachinko parlor's back door in Yokohama, a rusted bollard on a Kamino dock, the leg of a bench outside a police station in Hosu. Every place he ever walked through that had a wall or a curb or a piece of metal he could touch for half a second, he did it the way other people breathe. He did it in the middle of conversations. He did it while waiting for a light. He did it because the soul in his chest had learned something in a village a long time ago and never unlearned it. You do not know where you will need to be, so you mark everything always, and then the world becomes a place you can already reach. By the time he was 15, there were more than 4,000 of them. 212 of them were in buildings or on streets that villain organizations had, over the years, decided were quiet enough to work out of. He spread a map of Kamino on Gran Torino's table at 9:40 that night and started putting pins in it from memory. Torino watched him do it and did not interrupt. Sasaki Ren stood in the doorway with her coat still on and watched a 15-year-old put 31 pins in a district map without checking a single note and then say, "There," and tap 1. That one's the bar on Takoba. There's a vending machine on the corner outside. I marked the coin return in the spring 2 years ago before the League existed because I was walking past and it was there. He looked up. They set up 7 months ago. The coin's still in the tray. Nobody empties a coin return. You have got to be joking, Sasaki said. He's not, said Gran Torino. He never is. It's the worst thing about him. Izuku drew a circle on the map with his finger. The bar is a front. The building behind it has a basement that goes under the street, and it doesn't show on the plan because the plan is from 1974. Baku goes in there. There'll be 11 to 15 bodies on the ground floor, and the leadership will be 1 level down, in the back, because Kurogiri likes a room with 1 door. He put the pen down. Perimeter here, here, and here. Nobody comes in. If somebody comes out, they're mine. Don't touch them. And you? I'm going in through the back room. Torino frowned at the map. There's no mark in the back room. There will be. He got to the safe house at 10:11, which was 4 minutes before the League finished celebrating, and he did not use the front door. He came in through the coin return, which is to say he came out of a vending machine tray on a street corner at a dead run, crossed 9 meters of pavement, put a hand on the alley wall in passing, went up it, put a kunai through a ventilation grill at the top of the stairwell, and was inside the building's air handling space before anyone on the ground floor heard the grill move. 12 seconds later, he dropped a marked kunai down an old service pipe into the basement corridor. Then he went to work on the ground floor. Multiple people gave statements about that part later, and every statement is the same statement in different words. Being in one place and then being in another place, and the other place is the ceiling or the far wall or the bay off the Camino docks 400 meters out. And the transition is not in the memory at all. It is simply missing. There is standing in a room with a beer, and then there is the water. A man named Onishi, 44, 3 convictions, described it to a court as like when you fall asleep on a train and wake up at the end of the line. The rank and file went down in 40 seconds. Kurogiri got one hand up. He was a warp gate the size of a man, and there was nothing in the world faster than a warp gate. And he had been in 11 fights, and he had never once been caught. And the reason he had never been caught is that he was always somewhere else before the hit landed. But you have to know where the hit is coming from. He was sealed inside a steel drum in the middle of the basement corridor at 10:12:40 before he formed a single gate. The seal on the outside was drawn in something like ink that was not ink, and it went around the lid twice. And a commissioned technical unit spent 6 weeks on that drum before somebody finally just asked Izuku to open it. And he did, from 3 rooms away, and apologized for the confusion. The porthole in the drum lid showed a very confused pair of yellow eyes and a great deal of mist that had nowhere to be. Shigaraki was in the back room. Izuku came through the door, standing up, walking, hands loose, and Shigaraki did not run. That was the first thing worth noticing about him that night. 6 months earlier, he had been scratching a hole in his own neck in a plaza at the USJ, saying he's late, he's always late, voice going thin the second anybody stopped following the script. The thing sitting in the chair in the back room of a bar on Tacoba Street was not that. The hand over his face had gone still. The red eyes were level. He was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, like a man who had been waiting a while and had made his peace with waiting. "I wondered when we would be alone," he said. "Bakugo," Izuku said. "Where?" "You already know where. You were here in 11 minutes. Shigaraki tilted his head, and the movement was almost gentle. "We planned this facility for 6 months. 6 months. Kurogiri had it swept for tracking, for quirk residue, for satellite. I had a man walk the whole block with a scanner. There is nothing in this building." "The vending machine on Tacoba Street," Izuku said. "I marked the coin return 2 years ago. The coin was still in the tray when your people moved in 7 months back." There was a pause with something in it. "That is insane," Shigaraki said. "Bakugo's already with Gran Torino." Izuku took one step forward, and the room's proportions seemed to change slightly, the way a room does when the biggest thing in it moves. "This ends here." The exchange took 9 seconds, and it was total. Decay needs contact. That is the whole architecture of the man. 5 fingers on a surface, and the surface stops existing. And the reason it had worked on everything he had ever touched is that everything he had ever touched had been there when his hand arrived. He got 4 touches off. Each one landed on the place Izuku had been about a fifth of a second earlier. The chair went to powder. The table went. The wall behind Izuku's shoulder came apart into gray dust that hung in the air, and then the ceiling joists in one corner, and the whole back room of that building started to come down, while Izuku moved through it, as though the walls were a matter of opinion. On the 4th touch, Izuku caught his wrist. He did not break it. He turned it, and Shigaraki went off his feet and into the wreckage of the door frame, and Izuku put a knee between his shoulder blades and a hand flat on the back of his head, and held him there on the floor. And Shigaraki's fingers scraped at the concrete and took a hand-sized bite out of it and reached nothing. "You're strong," Izuku said, and he meant it the way he always meant it. "You're going to be very strong. Somebody has spent a long time building you, and I'd like to know who." Then the wall came in. Not a section of the wall. The wall. 16 meters of load-bearing masonry went from vertical to horizontal in one motion, and the shockwave of it registered on traffic cameras 16 blocks away as a frame of white. 3 buildings on Takoba Street lost every window on their east faces. A parked van went over on its side and slid 4 meters. On the perimeter, Sasaki Ren was knocked flat on her back on a rooftop and lay there looking up at a column of dust going 400 meters into the sky over Kamino and said out loud, "Oh no." All for One came out of the dust in iron. He was 11 feet of support armor and a body that had been kept alive far past the point where a body agrees to it, and he had come from 3 prefectures away in 11 minutes. And there was so much stolen power moving in him that the air around his shoulders had a shimmer to it like heat off a road. He put 1 foot down in the rubble of the back room, and he stopped. He had done this 150 times. He had come into rooms like this since before the Second World War, and he had a way of doing it. And part of the way was that he never stopped. Because stopping is a thing you do when the room has information in it you did not expect. He stopped. Because there was a boy standing in the middle of the wreckage with a hand still on the back of his protege's head, and the boy had turned to look at him, and All for One had felt something like that exactly once before, in 180 years of being awake, and it had not been from a hero, not Nana Shimura, not Toshinori, not any of the 7 who had carried the ember before them. Something older. Something from a place where this had been done properly for a long time by people who had done nothing else and had built a whole civilization out of doing it, and had then, presumably, put it down and walked away and left it in the ground for 1100 years, and now here it was standing in a wrecked room in Kamino with green hair and a hand-filed knife. You, All for One said, choosing the word out of a great many. Me, Izuku agreed. Then it started. It is important to be accurate about this fight because it was the first time in this story that Izuku Midoriya faced something that could have killed him. And the honest truth is that it was over in 91 seconds. And the reason it was over in 91 seconds is that All for One was the wrong shape. He was a collector. Everything he had taken off somebody. And everything he had taken worked one of 2 ways. It needed to touch you, or it needed you to be somewhere when it arrived. An air cannon in the left hand fired from the hip 140 kilopascals of compressed atmosphere that took the remaining half of the back room off the building and threw the debris across the street into a laundromat. It went through the space where a boy had been standing. Spring-like limbs and a strike that crossed 9 meters in a tenth of a second and cratered the floor. Binding cloth out of the right forearm, a spray of ribbons that filled the room from corner to corner, and every one of them closed on nothing, and one of them closed on a 3-pronged knife that had been left hanging in the air on purpose. And All for One understood what that meant. A half second before the yellow light came out of the middle of his own binding, the hit landed on the side of the iron mask. He took it. He weighed 400 kilos in that suit, and he had kinetic booster and rivet stab and a stockpile of pain tolerance he had stolen off a man in 1968. And he took it, and he came around with the whole armor on the arm, went through a support column, and the ceiling came down on both of them. They fought in the collapse. He used rupture at range because that was the answer. And he knew it was the answer within the first 10 seconds. And that is the thing about All for One. He was never stupid. He understood faster than anyone in this story, except one other person, exactly what he was fighting. He stopped trying to hit the boy. He started trying to remove the places the boy could go. He put rupture into the floor and turned it into sand. He tore the remaining walls down so there was nothing to mark. He filled the air with dust so thick that nothing thrown could be seen to land. "You are marking surfaces," All for One said from inside the dust, in a voice like something at the bottom of a well. "So I will remove surfaces. Do you know how many men have made me change how I fight? 4 in 80 years. He put forced quirk activation into the ground, and the water main under the street answered it and came up through the floor in a column. He put out a hand, and a rusted length of rebar 3 meters long ripped out of the concrete and went through the air at the speed of a rifle round. He did all of it well. That is the point. He fought better in that basement than he had fought in 50 years, out of a body that should have been in a bed, and if he had been fighting anything else in the world, he would have won. At 41 seconds, he tried the other thing. Inko, said All for One. The comms unit in his gorget clicked. He had a channel open. He had opened it before he came through the wall, because he always opened a channel before he came through a wall. And there were two men in a car outside a printing company in Mustarafu who had been sitting there for 6 weeks on a retainer, and one of them had a photograph on the dash. Izuku Midoriya, All for One said. 42. Works Tuesdays through Fridays at a printing house on Kaminogi. Walks home the same way every night past a bakery that closes at 7. The mask turned. Say the word and I will have. Izuku's expression did not change. That is the thing every account of that night agrees on, including All for One's own, which he gave 11 months later from a cell under a mountain in Gunma to a psychologist he was trying to bore into a stroke. The boy's expression did not change. Not a flicker, not a tightening at the eyes. Nothing. What changed was the next exchange. Izuku was not in the dust. He was behind him, and the hand that came down was open, and it landed flat on the shoulder joint of 400 kilos of iron support armor, and All for One's right arm was removed from the fight in the sense that it left the building. It went through the remains of the wall, across Takoba Street at a height of 2 meters, through the front window of the laundromat, and into the far wall of the laundromat, where it stuck out of the plaster at chest height, and stayed there for 6 hours until a forensics team took photographs of it that are still classified, All for One's own arm. Off at the shoulder, armor and all, he turned into the follow-up with everything he had left, and the follow-up came from below, and the iron mask cracked down the center from the crown to the chin. The dust came down. The basement of the safe house on Takoba Street was, by then, not a basement. It was a hole under a street, with the ceiling gone and the sky visible through it, and water coming down one wall out of a broken main, and in the middle of it, All for One was sitting on a slab of broken floor with his back against a column, one arm gone, the other hanging out of a shoulder that would not answer. The mask split so that a single very old eye showed through the gap. Behind him, Tamura Shigaraki lay unconscious in the rubble, where Izuku had put him. Izuku stood in front of him. He was not breathing hard. His coat was gray, and there was blood coming down the side of his face from something that had hit him in the collapse, and he had not noticed it yet. And he was standing with his hands at his sides in the wreckage of a man who had run the criminal history of Japan for 100 years. Nobody said anything for 4 seconds. Then Izuku said, in a voice that had nothing in it but the truth, "The fight is over. Choose what happens to the body." All for One did not answer immediately. He was, in that moment, doing something he had not done since 1948, which was thinking about what he wanted rather than what he was going to take. He could make the boy choose. He could refuse and force it and go out of the world in a room with a child who would have to carry it, and there was a version of himself that liked that very much. But he had understood something in the last 90 seconds, and it was worse than losing. There was nothing to plan around. Every enemy he had ever had was a system. All might was a system, power in a straight line, a time limit, a body with a hole in it. Nana Shimura was a system. Whole nations were systems, and he had eaten 3 of them. You studied the system, and you found the seam, and you put your hand in the seam. This one had no seam, because it did not fight in the world he was standing in. It fought in a world made of places, and it owned every place, and it had owned them for years before he had ever heard of it. And the only reason he was alive at the end of 91 seconds was that the boy had elected not to change that. He needed time to think about that. Time is a thing you can get in a cell. You cannot get it anywhere else. Prison, said All for One. Okay, Izuku said. He took the mask. Then he zip-tied what was left of a 100-year-old man to a steel column with 4 ties and a length of chain out of the rubble, and he walked back and checked Shigaraki's pulse and his airway and rolled him onto his side, and he went up out of the hole into the Camino night. Bakugo was on a roof 2 blocks over with Gran Torino, wrapped in the old man's coat, with a cut over one eye and a lip that had stopped bleeding. He had the coin in his fist. He did not say anything when Izuku came up over the parapet. He looked at him for a long moment, and then he opened his hand and looked at the coin, unbroken, and closed his hand again. Izuku sat down on the parapet next to him. "It got wet," he said. "What? You had it in your mouth. I could hear you breathing around it. It took me a second to work out what the sound was." Izuku dug in his pouch and came out with another 5 yen coin and held it out. "This one's dry." Bakugo took it. He put it in his pocket. He did not say thank you. He said, staring out at 11 emergency vehicles arriving on Takoba Street, 400 meters below, "You took 91 seconds. I counted." "You counted?" "There was nothing else to do. I was on a roof." He wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist. 91 seconds for the one they built the whole world around." "He's very good," Izuku said seriously. "He made me work. He's the second best I've fought." "Who's the first?" "Torino." "I'm right here," said Gran Torino from the water tower, delighted. All Might arrived at 10:40, expecting the worst night of his life. He came down onto Koba Street with his fists up and his heart going, and 11 years of fear standing on his chest, because a commission alert had gone out that said All for One confirmed active, Kamino Ward and Toshinori Yagi had been waiting for that sentence since 1988. He landed in a street full of dust and stopped. There were 61 villains in custody on the pavement, sorted into 3 groups by threat level, all of them in ties, most of them awake and none of them moving. There was a steel drum on a hand truck with a seal on the lid. There was a hole in the ground where a building had been, and in the hole, chained to a column with his mask in pieces, and one arm across the street in a laundromat, was the man who had taken his master's life. And there was a boy, sitting on a slab of broken concrete at the edge of it, with his kunai laid out on his knee in a row, checking the prongs one at a time, because he was fussy about them and he had made them himself. All Might walked over. He put his hands on his knees and stood there and breathed for a long time. "You left him alive," he said finally. "Yes." "Why?" Izuku held one of the knives up to the light of a fire engine and turned it, looking down the edge of it. "If I take everything from a man who has never lost," he said, "I make a martyr. There are people who would build a religion out of that. There always are." He put the kunai in the pouch. "But if I give him a cell and a cracked mask and 100 witnesses who watched it happen in 91 seconds, then he stops being a god and starts being a story that villains think twice about following." He looked up. "Both things need to be true. That he lost and that I'm the one who beat him. Those are different things and they both matter." All Might stood in the street. He had been the symbol of peace for 22 years. He had never once, in 22 years, thought about it that way. He had thought about winning, and about smiling while he did it, and about being seen, and he had been extraordinary at all 3, and he had never in his life thought about what shape the loss should be in when he was done. "That," he said slowly, "is the most Hokage thing anyone has ever said in this city." Izuku blinked. "What?" "Nothing." All Might straightened up. "Forget it." "No, what did you say? That's not a word." "I said nothing. I am extremely old and I say things." He turned toward the hole in the ground and then he stopped and looked back and his voice came out different. "Young Midoriya, you are bleeding above your ear and you have not noticed. Go and let somebody look at it." Izuku touched the side of his head and looked at his fingers with genuine surprise. "Oh," he said. Over the following 9 days, the League of Villains infrastructure in 6 cities came apart. It came apart because Izuku had left 3 sheets of paper on Gran Torino's kitchen table before he walked into that basement. And on those sheets were 31 pins in Kamino, 19 in Yokohama, 14 in Hosu, and a further 62 across Osaka, Nagoya, and Fukuoka. And next to each one, a note in green ink about what the place was and how many people were usually in it and which door they used. 6 years of walking around with his hand out. 6 years of touching bollards and bus shelters and the underside of desks. The commission ran 211 raids in 9 days, and they were the most successful 9 days in the history of Japanese law enforcement. And no press release about them ever mentioned where the map came from. Eri came to him through a chain he had been building for 4 years without knowing what it was for. A man he had put in a hospital in Nagoya, who had gotten out and gotten straight and now ran a bicycle repair shop, mentioned to a woman who mentioned to a bartender in Naruhara who mentioned one night to a 15-year-old boy in a coat who came in for a glass of water and left a coin on the bar, that the Saikai were not moving product like a normal outfit anymore, and that they had a doctor on retainer who had stopped seeing patients, and that a man who used to drive for them had said something about the boss's daughter. Except Kai Chisaki did not have a daughter. It took Izuku 11 weeks to turn a rumor into a file, and the file into a photograph, and the photograph was not a good photograph. It was a still off a security camera in a corridor. A very small girl in a hospital gown holding a man's hand, walking with her head down. You could see one horn. You could see that both her arms were wrapped from shoulder to wrist, and that she was holding the hand the way you hold something that will hurt you if you let go. He sat at his desk at 2 a.m. with a cold coffee and that photograph and did not move for 6 minutes. The old presence in his chest came up out of somewhere very far down. "Ah," it said, and that was all it said, and Izuku's face in the light of the desk lamp was the face from the warehouse when he was 8 years old. He did not go to the commission. He called Gran Torino at 2:14 in the morning, and the old man picked up on the second ring the way old men do, and Izuku said, "There is a child." Gran Torino said, "Where?" The Shiha Saikai compound was 18 floors, 16 of them underground, built into and beneath a traditional house in a walled garden on the edge of Nakano. There were 4 cell blocks, 2 laboratories, a corridor system that folded on itself, 41 armed men, 8 lieutenants with combat quirks, one of whom could rebuild the walls at will, and at the center of it, a man who could take you apart by putting his hand on you and who did not need a reason. In another version of this story, opening that place up takes a joint operation of 4 agencies, 11 pro heroes, 30-odd sidekicks, most of a day, and it costs somebody an arm. Izuku Midoriya did it with 3 kunai in 4 hours. And the only reason it took 4 hours is that he spent 40 minutes of it sitting on a floor talking through a door. He went in at 8:50 in the evening through a storm drain he had marked in April when he had walked past that wall on his way to a bookshop and put his hand on it because he put his hand on things. The first floor took 90 seconds. The second took 2 minutes. He worked downward and he did not raise an alarm on the first 4 levels. And by the time an alarm went up on the 5th, he was on the 9th. And by the time the 8th floor response team reached the 9th floor stair, he was on the 14th. Standing over a lieutenant called Rappa, who had asked for a fair fight and gotten one and been unconscious for 9 seconds of it. He found the labs on 16. He is on record about that. He stood in that room for 1 minute and 11 seconds with the lights on, and he read 3 of the labels on 3 of the vials, and he read a chart on a clipboard hanging on a hook. And then he put the clipboard back on the hook exactly where it had been so it would be admissible. And he left the room and he walked down the corridor, and the 4 men waiting at the end of it never got their weapons up. Chisaki was not the hard part. The hard part came after. The door was in a corridor on 17 at the end, past a nurse station with nobody at it. Steel. No window, a keypad and a bolt, and a mat on the floor outside that said nothing, and had been washed a great many times. Izuku broke the keypad with his thumb. Then he did not open the door. He sat down on the floor outside it with his back against the wall and his legs out, and he knocked twice on the steel, low down, near the bottom, where a small person would hear it best. He said, "Nothing. My name's Izuku. I'm not going to open the door. It's unlocked now, so you can open it whenever you want, or never, and either one is fine. And I'm going to sit out here for a while because I've been on my feet for 3 hours. Nothing. You don't have to say anything. Nothing." Somewhere above them, faintly, a fire door swung and banged. "So there's this old man I train with," Izuku said. He's 79 and he tells everybody he's 80 because he thinks it gets him more sympathy, which it does, which is the annoying part. And he lives in this apartment in Hozu that's, okay, so there's a cutlet on the wall, a pause. On the wall, stuck to it. It's been there for at least 2 years because I first saw it 2 years ago and it looked old then. And every time I mention it, he says, it's a garnish. He says the wall is garnished. And last month I took it off the wall with a spatula and he actually got upset with me. He said I'd ruined the balance of the room. The silence on the other side of the door changed. Not a sound, a quality. He kept going. He told her about Bakugo blowing up his own lunch in the cafeteria, an actual detonation in a bento at a table in front of 19 people, and spending the next 20 minutes explaining that it had been intentional, that he had done it on purpose, for reasons, and everyone at the table nodding, and Kirishima saying, yeah, no, that tracks, and Bakugo eating a plain rice ball in total silence for the rest of the period with the dignity of a king. He told her about the time he got a 62 on an English quiz and sat looking at it for so long that Aizawa came over and asked if he needed a minute, and he said yes, and Aizawa gave him a minute, and he took it. He told her the cafeteria's rice to curry ratio was wrong and that he had brought it up with the kitchen staff 4 times. At 22 minutes, the door opened. Not all the way. About 11 centimeters, a small face in the gap, 1 horn, hair like something that had been white for a long time, and eyes that were doing a thing eyes should not do at 6 years old, a person for what they are going to want. Izuku did not get up. He did not reach out. He did not say, you're safe now, or it's over, or I'm here to save you, because all of those are things you say to somebody who knows what those words mean. He unwound the white scarf from around his own neck and held it out folded on his open palm. It's cold in the stairwell, he said. She looked at it for a long time. Then she came out and took it and put it around her shoulders with both hands the way children do, and stood in front of him. He turned around and crouched down with his back to her. She climbed on. She was on his back for the last 40 minutes of it. He went up through 11 floors of that compound with a 6-year-old girl's arms around his neck. And there were men on 9 of those floors, and not one of them so much as raised a voice in her hearing, because he got to each of them before their mouths opened. He did it out of her sight line. He did it with her head against the side of his neck. Somewhere around the 12th floor, she went to sleep. And after that, he stopped teleporting entirely and walked, because the drop feeling wakes people up. Kai Chisaki was in the lobby, and Kai Chisaki is the one part of that night Izuku Midoriya has never talked about. Here is what is known. The man had a quirk that could take a human being apart and put them back together wrong, and he had used it on a child for 4 years, and he had a plan and a philosophy and a very good suit. He got one hand on a wall and turned the wall into a spear and put it through the place where the boy was standing. He tried to talk. He said something about order and about the necessary cost of a thing worth building. Then Izuku Midoriya put a hand on the back of his neck and knelt him down on the marble. He wanted to kill him. That is not something the story should be shy about. The presence in his chest, the same one that had gone through 104 men in 3 seconds in a warehouse in Camino to get to a woman in a chair, was not ambiguous and did not offer a second opinion, and would have supported it completely. But there was a 6-year-old asleep against his shoulder with her hands loose in the collar of his coat, and she was afraid of blood. So he took Chisaki's arms out at the shoulder joints, dislocated both in under a second, and he did it without a sound, and the man passed out from it, which was, in the end, a mercy that had nothing to do with mercy. He sealed both palms flat to the lobby floor with 2 kunai through the coat, and something drawn in a circle around each hand that nobody has ever been able to reproduce. He set the man's head to one side so he would not choke. Then he wrote a note, notebook paper, green ink. He wrote it kneeling on the marble with the girl asleep on his back, and it said 17 floors, labs on 16, the paperwork on 14, there are 2 more children on 15, and they are both stable, 41 in custody, all breathing, all sorted. I'm giving you 30 minutes and then I call a journalist instead. Please be gentle with the girl. She does not know what gentle is yet, and it will take her a while. The boy from Thursday. He put it on Chisaki's chest under a paperweight from the front desk and called it in at 12:41. They came in 27 minutes. He handed Eri to a paramedic at the gate, literally handed her, reaching back and lifting her off and passing her over with both arms while she was still mostly asleep. And he said, "She has the scarf. Don't take the scarf." And then he stepped back into the garden and was not in the garden. Nobody got a photograph. 11 agencies were there inside an hour, and there is not one photograph. In the ambulance, Eri sat up with the scarf in her fists and looked at the paramedic. Who was that? The paramedic was 29 years old, from Shizuoka, and had spent 6 years telling his brother that the underworld's yellow light ghost story was a load of nonsense, that people invent things, that there is always a rational explanation. They call him the Yellow Flash, he said. Eri thought about it. He said, I could have his scarf if I was cold, she said. The paramedic looked at the white scarf around the little girl's shoulders, which was longer than she was tall and had a scorch mark on one end from a forest 3 months earlier. He did not speak for a while. The commission, having learned nothing, decided that it had run out of patience. This is the part of the story that historians find the most difficult to explain, and the explanation, when it finally came out in a select committee 11 years later, was extremely simple and extremely stupid. The commissioner never read the February file. She read the summary. Everybody read the summary. The summary was 4 pages long, and it was good work. And the last line of it in bold on page 4, under a heading that said risk profile, said this: the only thing that makes this subject dangerous is a direct threat to his mother. She read the 4 pages in 2016 in the back of a car, and she remembered the number 104, and she did not remember the bold line, because human beings remember numbers. So after Overhaul, after Kamino, after the training camp, after Hosu, after everything, after 2 years of watching a minor take 3 national security problems off the board without permission, without oversight, and without ever once being where anybody expected him to be, she made a decision about leverage. She put 2 agents on Izuku Midoriya's street, surveillance only, at first. A silver sedan at the top of the road with 2 men in it in rotation, watching a woman go to work and come home and buy leeks and stop to talk to a neighbor about a dog. It went on for 6 days. Then a letter came, commission letterhead embossed, addressed to Midoriya I, guardian of. 4 paragraphs, all of them polite, and the third one contained a sentence about the review of guardianship arrangements in cases involving minors of significant national interest. Izuku read it at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning while his mother made tea. He read it twice. He folded it back along its own creases. He put it in the trash under a carton, and then he took it out of the trash and photographed it and put it back. Anything important? Inko said. Junk mail. They send so much. They do. Izuku agreed and ate his rice. The 2 commission agents on Inko's street disappeared at 9:40 that evening. They were found the next morning at 6:12 by a cleaner in the lobby of the commission's own headquarters in central Tokyo, 19 floors of glass and no plants, seated side by side in the visitor chairs by the fountain that was added in 2011 and worked with the floor. Both of them awake, both of them completely unhurt. Both of them sitting bolt upright with their hands on their knees, and neither of them able to say a single word about how they had gotten from a silver sedan in Musutafu to a secured government building 40 kilometers away through 11 card access doors, 4 man traps, a night security desk with 2 guards, and a motion system with a maintenance log that showed no events. Each of them was holding a piece of notebook paper. Both notes said the same thing, in green ink: please say hello to my mother again, and I will not be this polite. Underneath, a small drawing of a knife with 3 prongs. The commissioner had Nezu on the phone by 7. She said the word unacceptable 4 times in 90 seconds. She said intimidation of federal officers. She said the boy had walked into a secure facility. Nezu let her finish. That was his habit. He let people finish, always, all the way into the silence at the end where they could hear themselves. He is a minor, Nezu said, who moved 2 of your agents through a hardened government building in the middle of the night without tripping a single alarm and left them unharmed, gift-wrapped, in your own waiting room with a handwritten note using the word, please. A pause with tea in it. Commissioner, I want to be helpful here. I do not think the lesson available to us this morning is that Izuku overreacted. She said she wanted a meeting. He's available on Thursdays, she said this Thursday. Ah, said Nezu. This Thursday is Gran Torino's training day and he's busy. Next Thursday looks open. The surveillance was dropped by noon. The letter never came back. The watch list, which had been struck once already, stayed struck, and in fact was overwritten in the system in a way that made it unrecoverable, and nobody at the commission ever found out who did that either. Izuku came home on Friday for dinner. His mother was at the table with her tea and a magazine, and she did not look up. "Was that the government?" she said. "Yes." "Did you handle it?" "Yes." "Eat your rice." He ate his rice. The thing with Ochako happened in October, on the dorm balcony, at 11:30 at night, and nobody clipped it because there was nothing in it. She had been losing the war with herself for over a year, and by that autumn she was losing it more gracefully, which paradoxically made it visible to absolutely everyone. She had stopped going red. She had stopped putting milk on her rice. She could hold an entire conversation with him now about internship reports and municipal contracts and breath timing, and she could do it looking straight at him, and Mina Ashido had stopped teasing her about it in September for reasons Mina could not articulate, but which came down to the fact that it was not funny anymore. She came out onto the balcony for air, and he was already there, elbows on the rail, looking at nothing. Hey. He shifted over. "You should have a coat. It's cold." "You're not wearing a coat." "I'm always warm. It's a thing." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's probably related. I've never asked anybody." She stood next to him at the rail. Below them, the campus lights were doing their slow orange thing, and somewhere off toward the gates, a delivery truck was reversing. "Your report came back," she said. "Fat Gum's office. They said your write-up on the anchor points was going to the diet." "It's not going to the diet. It's going to a subcommittee, which is a room with 11 people in it and a bad kettle." He smiled at the railing. "But if they do it, every gymnasium in the country gets an evacuation anchor. That's 4,000 rooms. I could do the whole country in about a year if they let me." "You'd spend a year touching walls." "I'd spend a year touching walls." He agreed happily. She looked at him. Here is what she was looking at. A boy, 16 years old and 6'2", who had ended the hero killer in 1 1/10 seconds in an alley, who had taken All for One's arm off in Camino, and then argued about the shape of the defeat, who had carried a child out of 17 underground floors on his back without letting her see anything, and who was standing on a balcony in a t-shirt at 11:30 at night, genuinely excited about the prospect of spending 12 months walking into school gymnasiums and putting his hand on the wall. And she understood, all at once and completely, two things that she had been arguing with herself about for a year and a half. The first was that she was never going to stop feeling this. The second was that it did not need to go anywhere. That was the part that surprised her. She had been carrying it around like a thing that had to be resolved, confessed or crushed or grown out of. And standing there on the balcony with her arms on the cold rail, she felt the whole apparatus of that just stop. There was nothing to resolve. She was going to be a hero, and she was going to be a very good one. And this boy was going to be the reason she pushed herself for the next 40 years. And also, she was going to love him a bit in the back of her chest at low volume, probably permanently. And none of those three things was in conflict with any of the others. Something closed in her, gently. A door that had been standing open since a girl with a pinned leg looked up at a falling building and was suddenly 30 meters away in somebody's arms, being told you are safe now. Not shut, closed, the way you close a book you intend to keep. Uraraka? You've gone quiet. Is your calf bothering you? Because if it's the old fracture, the way you're standing... Midoriya. Yeah? She turned her head and looked at him, and she smiled. And it was the most honest thing that happened in Class 1A that entire year. Nothing, she said. I'm really glad I met you. He looked at her for a second, and whatever he saw, he did not comment on because he was not stupid, whatever everybody thought. Me too, he said. Then he took his elbows off the rail and said her breath timing had slipped 4% since the summer, and she should come to the gym on Sunday. And she said she would, and she did. And she raised her limit another 6% by December. That was it. That was the whole thing. They both remembered it for the rest of their lives. The war declaration came in March. Redestro's Meta Liberation Army had spent 130 years and 11 billion yen becoming a corporation, and Tamura Shigaraki had spent 6 months in a tank in a doctor's basement in Jaku becoming something else. And when the two of them merged, there were 116,000 names on the roll. They called it the Paranormal Liberation Front. They put out a statement, they gave interviews, and on the 11th of March, they announced on 9 hijacked broadcast channels at once that on the morning of the 14th, they would take the country, and they gave the location because the whole point was that they wanted the heroes to come. Every criminal syndicate in Japan sent men because the syndicates had read the numbers. Every ideology-driven organization sent believers. Every liberation zealot who had spent a decade waiting for the symbol of peace to show a crack got on a bus. 100,000 on the plane at Jaku by the morning of the 14th. The rest in reserve in 11 cities. The math did not work for the heroes. Everybody knew it, and nobody said it in front of a camera. Japan could field 11,000 licensed professionals and pull maybe 6,000 of them to one place. And a pro hero is worth a great many ordinary criminals. But a great many is not a number that survives contact with 100,000. What the front had built was not a fight. It was mass. It was a thing designed to wear a line down the way water wears down stone. Not fast, not impressive, just finally. The Joint Command met for 31 hours across 3 days and produced a plan that was, in its own words, a delaying action. Izuku Midoriya was in that meeting for 11 minutes on the second day. He was 16 years old. He was there because Nezu insisted and Endeavor seconded it, and he sat at the back and listened to a lieutenant from the commission talk through the projected engagement envelope, and then he raised his hand and asked one question. Are the civilians clear? Jaku Ward has been evacuated to a radius of 9 kilometers. The plain is agricultural land. There's nothing on it but the front. So there's nobody in there who isn't there on purpose. That is correct. Okay, Izuku said. Thank you. He did not say anything else. He did not object to the plan. He shook 11 hands on the way out, and he thanked the woman who had been running the projector. On the night of the 13th, he sat at his desk in the dorm until 4 in the morning making kunai. He made 11 new ones and refiled 9 old ones, and he laid all 32 out on a towel in a row and checked each one, and then he put them in the pouch. At 5:50 on the morning of the 14th, he was on the ridge above the plain at Jaku. He was there before the first wave. He was there before a single order was given, before the command tents on the hero side were fully up, before the helicopters, before dawn. Behind him, over the next 20 minutes, 110 pro-heroes came up onto that ridge. That is who was there at the front. The ones who had drawn the first line, the ones who had asked to be at the point, which is not the same as the ones who were ordered there. Endeavor, Mirko, Fat Gum, 13. Mount Lady, Kamui Woods, Death Arms, who had filed a report about a 14-year-old 2 years earlier and been laughed at, and had kept the copy. They came in full armor with backup plans and contingencies, and the settled, grim courage of people who have written letters and left them where they will be found. Gran Torino came up last, on his own legs, because he refused a lift. The light in the east was just starting. Not day yet. That gray-blue before it, where you can see shapes but not colors, and the plain below the ridge was 2 square kilometers of flat farmland, and it was full. 100,000 people, not a mob. That was the horror of it, and every hero on that ridge felt the same thing when they looked down and understood it. They were in columns. Someone had organized them. There were staging areas and equipment depots and vehicle lines and command platforms up on scaffolds with lights on them, and there were flags, and there was a public address system, and somewhere near the middle of it, 11,000 people were doing a call-and-response chant in unison, and the sound of it came up the slope like weather. Mount Lady, at 25 in full costume, said okay, and did not say anything after it. Izuku stood at the front edge of the ridge with his hands in his pockets and looked at it. He could feel Shigaraki. Somewhere back beyond the depots, past the vehicle line, in the last third of the field, a wrongness in the air, a static with no natural source, a pressure that did not belong to a person. He had felt it once before, in a basement on Takoba Street. coming off a young man in a chair whose hand had gone still. It was larger now, much larger. Whatever had gone into that tank in Jakku had come out with the whole transfer settled in it, and what was standing in the back of that plane was not the scratching, petulant boy from the USJ who had gone thin in the voice when a courier screamed. Izuku took his hands out of his pockets and reached into the pouch on his hip. He counted his kunai. He did it with his fingers without looking down, the way you count change. 32. One pouch of marked coins on the other hip, 41 of them, some of them 8 years old. And in his chest, awake and level, the soul of a man who had once walked alone into an army on a border in a country that no longer exists. An army of 10,000 out of a place called Stone, sent to break a line at a bridge, and had come out the other side of it, and had not come out because he was lucky. He had come out because there had been nothing in that army faster than him. There never was. There never is. Midoriya. Endeavor, standing 4 meters back with the flames off his shoulders down to a bare shimmer to save fuel, looking at the plane the way a man looks at the sea. The command plan puts you in the second echelon with the mobility teams, he said. Reactive. You were briefed. I know. You are not going to do that? No. Izuku said. Endeavor was quiet for a second. Then, what is the plan? Izuku looked down at 100,000 people. He looked at it the way he looked at a room, which he had been doing since he was 8 years old in a warehouse in Kamino with 104 men in it and his mother in a chair. Exits. Threat clusters. Where the voices come from. Which parts of a formation are structure and which parts are just people standing near structure. The nodes that hold the whole thing together if you cut them, and the 11,000 who scatter the moment those nodes stop answering. They're in columns, he said. That's a mistake. Columns are for people who expect the fight to come from the front. Then he took every kunai out of the pouch. He held them fanned in both hands, 16 and 16, and Mount Lady later said the sound of it was the thing she remembered. 32 pieces of hand-filed steel shifting against each other, small and thin and completely ordinary, on a ridge above 100,000 people. He threw them. Up, wide, spreading. The way you throw seed. Some of them going out long and flat, 200 meters and more, turning over and over in the gray light and coming down into the packed earth at the front rank. Some going high, arcing up over the columns and coming down deep, off a scaffold rail, into the side of a generator trailer, into the canvas roof of a command tent, into the dirt between 2 men in the 14th row who both looked at it, and neither of whom said anything for a full second. 32 blades into a crowd of 100,000, and the crowd's own mass made them invisible. That is the part the front's after-action review could never get past in the 4 pages of it that were ever written. The blades landed among 100,000 bodies and were absorbed by them. A knife in the dirt 11 rows back is not an event. It is a thing on the ground. 2 men in the 14th row saw one. Nobody in the 15th row did. A woman on a scaffold heard one hit the rail beside her and did not turn around because there was a public address system going and she had a job. By the time every one of the 32 had stopped moving, there were maybe 400 people on that plane who knew a knife had arrived, out of 100,000, and not one of them had the whole picture. 2 heartbeats of silence. Down in the front rank, a man in a liberation armband, a Kyushu chapter organizer, 38 years old, a father of 2, who had come because a very persuasive person had told him this was how his daughter got to live in a world that let her use what she was born with. Looked down at his boots. There was a knife in the dirt 11 centimeters from his foot. It had 3 prongs. He said, "Oh," and it came out of him with no air behind it, and it was the last word he ever said, and the man next to him heard it and turned and started to ask what. Then the light started. Yellow. Everywhere. Not one flash. 40 at once. 50. All across 2 square kilometers of plane in the same instant. At the front rank and the command scaffolds and the depot and the middle columns and the vehicle line and back at the front rank, and the ridge behind saw the whole field light up from the inside like something electrical going wrong in a very large machine. And under the light, the sound. That sound. The one that has no clean description in this language or any other. The 6 survivors of the Kamino warehouse spent the rest of their lives failing to put into words to therapists and detectives and each other at 3 in the morning with the lights on. The one, an orderly at Musutafu General, got closest to when he said it was like somebody shaking out a wet bedsheet in a very large room over and over, the bedsheet sound. And under it, the other sound, the heavy rhythmic drumming, the beginning of hard rain on a car roof. And there were 100,000 people on that plane, and the rain sound did not stop. It got louder because it was not one room now, it was 2 square kilometers. Here's what it was like to be in it. It was like this. You are standing in the 11th row of the 3rd column with a length of pipe in your hands and a man you met on the bus in front of you. And the man you met on the bus is not there, not fallen, not hit, not there. The space he occupied is empty, and the air is moving into it, and there is a smell like a struck match, and you have not heard anything yet because the sound is behind the fact. You turn. There is nobody behind you either. There were 11 people behind you. You open your mouth and the light comes, and it comes from a direction that is not a direction, and something takes you off your feet at a velocity your body has no way to interpret, and the last thing your eyes send to your brain is a boy's face, seen for 1/11th of a second, at a distance of 40 centimeters, with green hair falling forward and gold running through it, and absolutely nothing in the expression at all. Not anger. That is what the survivors could not make anybody understand. There was no anger in it. There was a tension. He moved through 100,000 people the way Minato Namikaze moved through the stone army on the border at the bridge. 1 man, 1 field, 32 blades cycling through a loop. His hands ran without counting, throw and arrive and throw and arrive. The Flying Thunder God firing on every marked point in sequence, and then faster than sequence, faster than pattern, faster than anything a human eye can track or a human mind can plan around. Level 2, multi-point. He was not going from A to B. He was at 11 points in the time it takes to say the word 11, and each arrival lasted long enough for 1 motion, and each motion removed a man from the fight, and the blade was already in the air for the next one before the body finished leaving the ground. He was at the front rank and the command post and the depot and back at the front rank before the echo of the first arrival had finished crossing the field. 1 target per half second, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, if they were standing close enough that a single pass through the middle of them handled all 3, and in the middle third of that formation, men were standing shoulder to shoulder because somebody had told them to hold ranks. He did not slow down. He did not hesitate. He did not search. He did not choose. He had done the choosing on the ridge in the 20 seconds before he threw, and everything after that was hands. 30 seconds in, the front rows were gone. Not broken. Gone. 9,000 people in the first 4 ranks of a formation 2 kilometers wide, and where they had been standing, there was open ground and equipment and nothing upright, and the 5th rank turned around to run and could not, because the 6th rank had not understood yet and was still holding position, and the light was already in the 6th rank. At 60 seconds, the command structure was gone. Every scaffold, every platform, every man with a radio and a list. Redestro's regional coordinators, 11 of them on 11 different platforms across the field, all 11 of them off their platforms inside 4 seconds of each other. And the public address system still going, still playing a recorded call and response over a plane where nobody was answering it. And that recording kept playing for another 40 seconds, and it is on the audio from the ridge, and there is no worse sound in the archive of this war. The formation had no voice. And the middle columns, 31,000 people, began to understand all at once in the way a crowd understands things, which is not by reasoning but by contagion, that the men in front of them had stopped existing in an upright position, and the light was coming backwards through the field toward them, and there was nowhere on that plane that was not the field. That is when the screaming started, not before. That is the detail that comes up in every account. And it is the one that makes people put the transcript down. For the first 60 seconds of the battle at Jakku Plain, 100,000 people were mostly silent, because the thing happening to them was happening faster than the noise a person makes about it. At 90 seconds, the light was in the back third. The true believers. The Liberation Corps. The ones who had not come for money or fear or a bus ticket. The Zealots. The ones who had waited a decade for this morning and had written things down about it and told their families, the ones who had sung on the way in, they ran. 58,000 of them made it off that plane. That number matters, and the story is going to say it plainly because it is the truest thing about what Izuku Midoriya is. 58,000 people ran away from Jakku Plain that morning, and every single one of them lived. He let them go. All of them. Anybody moving away from the field at any speed, in any direction, at any point in those 109 seconds was not touched. And there is footage from a helicopter at 400 meters showing the yellow light stop dead at the edge of a fleeing crowd like water reaching the top of a glass. Not all of them made it, though, because he had done the choosing on the ridge and there had been 3 lists in it. There was a 4-man intelligence cell in the rear echelon, sitting in the back of a truck with a laptop and a printer. And on that laptop were 12 names and addresses of people connected to the heroes on the ridge, with photographs. And one of the photographs was of a girl of 14 in a school uniform outside a gate in Nagoya. They had printed it 11 times for distribution. There were 19 lieutenants out of the Kamino and Yokohama syndicates who had run the operation that put a hit on a hospital ward in Nakano in October. Because a 6-year-old girl with a rewind quirk was worth a very great deal of money to certain people and worth even more dead to certain others. There were 11 men and 1 woman in the front's operations branch whose signatures were on the order that had sent 6 villains up a mountain road in the summer with instructions that did not include the phrase, "avoid the students." And there were, in a file cabinet in a command tent on the eastern edge of the plain, 4 sheets of paper with the address of a printing house on Kaminoge and the walking route of a 42-year-old woman who stopped at a bakery and the words "primary lever" underlined twice. Those ones did not get the courtesy of unconsciousness. 72 people died on Jakku Plain that morning. Every one of them was an active combatant with an open warrant. Every one of them was somebody who had put their name on paper next to the name of a child or a mother. And every one of them was found afterward with nothing on the body but overwhelming impact force, delivered from a direction they had not been facing. The battle lasted 109 seconds. Then it stopped. That was the part the 110 heroes on the ridge could not process. More than any of it. Not the light and not the sound, but the way it ended. There was no wind down. There was no last flare. The light was moving through the back of the field, and then there was no light, and the sound stopped mid-beat, and what was left was 2 square kilometers of flat farmland in the gray gold of first sunrise, with maybe 2,000 people still standing on it, most of them on their knees, with their hands on their heads, and a public address system playing nothing, and the wind coming across it from the east. 110 professionals stood on a hill in full armor with contingencies and backup plans and letters left where they would be found, and watched. Nobody had fired a shot. Nobody had moved off the ridgeline. 31 seconds into it, someone on the command channel had said, "Hold, hold, do not deploy." And after that, nobody said anything on the command channel at all for the better part of 2 minutes. Matt Lady broke it. She said it at full volume in the middle of absolute silence, and it went out over the open channel and into every recording. And it is the line that people quote when they talk about Jakku more than any of the official ones. He threw a bag of coins. Nobody answered her. He threw a bag of coins and 32 knives, and then he just went. Mirko was standing 2 meters to her left with her ears flat back against her skull and her fists loose at her sides, which for that woman was a thing nobody had ever seen. "Do not ask me to follow up after that," she said. Endeavor said nothing. He looked at the field, and then he looked at the sky over the field, and then he checked his own hands and put them down. Gran Torino was at the very edge of the ridge, the oldest hero alive, the fastest hero of his own era, and still, on paper, the fastest hero in the record book, because nobody had ever bothered to log the boys' numbers in the same table. 46 years of coming up hills like this one. He had buried a woman he loved and about 100 other people, and he had spent 4 decades watching promising children come through the system and turn into cops or corpses or cowards, and he had built an entire personality out of expecting the worst, and it had never failed him once. Not once in 46 years. He stood at the edge and watched the yellow light finish its work. When it was over, he took the flask out of his inside pocket. He did not drink to the boy. He did not drink to himself. He unscrewed it and held it out a little toward the field and drank to Nana Shimura, who was not there, who had been dead 39 years, who had once told him in a kitchen in Shibuya that the whole point of the job was to hand it to somebody better than you and then get out of the way, and who was the person on this earth that Izuku Midoriya had most needed to meet and never would. She would have been so unbearably, insufferably proud. He screwed the cap back on and put it away and said nothing to anybody, and nobody asked. Then Tamura Shigaraki walked out of the smoke at the east end of the plain. Bigger. That was the first thing every person on the ridge registered before the veins and before the eyes. Taller and broader through the shoulders and chest than a person is, the proportions of somebody who had been grown rather than raised. The pale skin mapped over with spreading black-purple lines that moved when he moved, all for one stolen century running through him like current through a wire that had been built for something smaller. The hands were gone. All of them. The severed hands he had worn since he was 11 years old, his father's, his mother's, his sister's, the grandmother's, burned away when the first wave of the transfer hit, and what was underneath was worse than the hands had been. It was just his face. Bare. The red eyes and the cracked lips and the pale hair and the scratching hand at the side of the neck that had come back now, up and down over skin that no longer marked. He came out into the open and stopped and looked at his army. He looked at it for 11 seconds. There is a helicopter shot of that, and the 11 seconds are in it. Then he looked up the field, at the one figure standing in the middle of it in a coat that had been white at 5:50 in the morning. 98,000, Shigaraki said. His voice carried. Something in the transfer carried it. In 2 minutes. 109 seconds, Izuku said. You're not a hero. I know. You're like me. No. Izuku rolled his right shoulder once, the way he did, working something out of it. You destroy because the world hurt you and you never found one single thing worth building. Not one. You had 10 years and a lot of very smart help, and you never built anything. He reached into the pouch and came out with one kunai, the last one, and let it hang loose at his side. I destroy when the world hands me something that can't be saved any other way. Those are not the same, and you know they're not. Because if they were the same, you wouldn't have opened with it. You killed 100 men when you were 8 years old. Shigaraki's head tilted. For one woman. Yes. And you think that makes you better than me? Izuku was quiet for a moment. The sun cleared the ridge behind him while he thought about it, and the whole plain went gold at once, and it caught the smoke and made it beautiful, which was obscene, and nobody who was there has ever forgotten how beautiful that morning was. I think the 100 men were going to kill her, he said. I think the ones I took off this field today had my mother's address in a filing cabinet and had underlined it. I think I could stand in front of any court in any country in the world and account for every single one of those decisions out loud with my name on it and then go home and sleep fine. He raised the kunai. I think you can't say that about one. Not one, Tomura, not in 12 years. Shigaraki smiled with all of his teeth. Then let's find out, he said, how fast you really are. And the decay began. It did not start where his hand was. That was the first thing that made this different from every other fight in this story. It started 40 meters out, in a ring, all at once. The ground going gray and then going to nothing. The topsoil and the clay under it and the field stones and the irrigation pipe 11 centimeters down, all of it coming apart into dust that was not even dust, into a fineness that had no name, spreading outward at the speed of a car and eating the plain. Tamura Shigaraki with the full reserve behind him was not a person anymore, and the story is not going to pretend otherwise. He touched the ground and the ground ended. He touched the air and the air went wrong, some property of it failing so that the sound in a 3-meter radius went flat and strange. He moved faster than a body that size has any right to move. The power in him not stable. Never stable. Forced into a vessel 11 months before the vessel was ready, and it did not need to be stable to kill. And he had spent 2 years studying Izuku Midoriya. That was the thing. That was what made the next 4 minutes the closest anyone came. He knew about the seals. He knew about the marked kunai and the marked coins and the 4,000 marks across Japan. He knew because All for One had explained it to him in a room under a mountain in Gunma through a glass panel, exactly how the Flying Thunder God worked. It is not speed, it is places. And a man who owns the places owns the fight. So he had built his entire approach around denying the places. Wide-range decay, continuous, sweeping. Not aimed at the boy, aimed at every surface within 100 meters of him, stripping the ground and the equipment and the wrecked trucks and the scaffolding so that a kunai thrown at anything landed in something that was in the process of ceasing to be a thing. Pulled air, stolen off a man in Osaka in 1994, dragging everything loose off the ground and up into a rotating wall of debris so that nothing thrown could travel clean. And at range, without contact, forced activation and ruin, and a stolen search and destroy that fired at whatever moved over and over, so that Shigaraki never had to be near his target at all. In theory, it was the best counterplan anybody had ever built against the Yellow Flash. In theory, it was better than Todoroki's Ice Dome, and better than Dabi's Wall of Blue, and better than All for One's 91 Seconds in a Basement, because it was the first one built on the correct premise, which is that you do not beat this by hitting him. You beat him by taking away the world. For the first time in this story, Izuku Midoriya was pushed. He had to move faster than he moved. That does not sound like much, and it is everything. He threw a kunai at the hulk of a generator trailer, and the trailer went to powder in the air before the blade reached it, and the blade went through the space where it had been and landed in ground that was already going. He arrived at a mark, and the mark's surface was gone a fifth of a second later, and he had to be off it before it went. Twice he arrived somewhere, and the ground under his feet was already failing, and he had to fold again immediately with nothing chosen, which is the one thing he had trained out of himself at 12 years old. 4 minutes and 11 seconds. On the ridge, 110 heroes watched the middle of Jakku Plain become a rotating gray storm 200 meters across with something moving inside it, too fast to resolve. And for the first time all morning, the people on that hill were afraid for him. And Mount Lady put her hand over her mouth, and Endeavor took 2 steps forward before he stopped himself. At 4 minutes and 11 seconds, Izuku stopped moving. He came out of the storm at the western edge of it and put his feet down on a strip of ground that had not been touched yet, and he stood still with his arms loose while everything Shigaraki had came around toward him, and he closed his eyes. There was no announcement. There was no speech, no wind up, no name shouted at a sky. That is not what the technique is, and it never was. 3 seconds, standing still in the middle of a collapsing plain with a monster's whole arsenal turning to face him, doing nothing at all. What happened in those 3 seconds is that something entered his eyes when he opened them. The people who were closest, and the closest were 400 meters away, and one of them was Gran Torino, who had known this boy for 9 years, say it was not a change in color and not a change in shape. It was that the eyes stopped being a boy's eyes. Something came into them that was deeper than attention and wider than a battlefield and much older than this fight. The soul in his chest had been a great many things over the course of this story. A hand on his hand in a street in February, a voice saying, "Let them arrive," a weight under a warm sentence in a dome of ice. This was the quietest form of it, and it was the most powerful. His perception opened out and filled everything. He felt the decay coming before Shigaraki's arm moved. Felt the intention gather in the shoulder, in the hip, in the shift of weight, 0.3 of a second before the hand went out. He felt the borrowed quirks charging, each one distinct, like separate notes on separate instruments in a room he was standing in the middle of. He felt the plain, 2 square kilometers of it, Every fold in the ground, every wrecked vehicle, the gray storm and the shape of the storm and the 11 places inside the storm where the air was still moving normally. He felt the ridge. He felt the 110 people on the ridge individually, all of them, their positions and their heart rates. And the fact that a very old man at the front edge had a flask in his inside pocket. He felt a bird in the tree line to the north doing something cheerful. Nothing could surprise him. Nothing on that plane could get within 40 meters of him without announcing itself first. And the announcement arrived before the thing did, every time, forever. And now Tamura Shigaraki was throwing the entire stolen inheritance of the 20th century at a target who already knew where all of it was going. The last 90 seconds of the Battle of Jakku Plain are, in the honest opinion of everyone who has studied them, not a fight. They are a demonstration of the gap. Shigaraki fired ruin at a point, and Izuku was not standing at the point and had not been standing at the point when the charge began. Shigaraki swept the ground and Izuku was above the ground. Shigaraki brought the whole rotating wall of debris in on itself in a closing fist, and there was nothing in the fist, and Izuku was behind him with a hand flat between his shoulder blades. And Shigaraki went 11 meters and came up onto his feet with the black lines crawling all the way up his throat now, and his teeth full of blood. He understood. Then, it is in the transcript of his own statement, 11 months later, in a room with a table bolted to the floor. I understood that he had been holding something back the entire time. Not power. Something else. I had built my whole approach on the assumption that I was fighting him. Hid it. I was fighting the version of him that was enough. So he did the only thing left, which was everything. He stopped moving. He put both arms out and down, and he opened the reserve all the way. The complete collection, every quirk on every quirk, 100 years of theft layered into one point in front of his chest, the absolute maximum output of a body that had been designed for exactly this and nothing else. The air over the plain went the color of a bruise. The remaining stones on the ground lifted. On the ridge, 400 meters up and away, the pressure changed enough that 11 people's ears popped, and Fat Gum said, "Get down," and 110 professionals got down. It took 2.5 seconds to gather. Izuku Midoriya spent the first second putting a seal on the ground at his feet. He spent the second one walking forward. He spent the half second, the last half second, the one where both of Shigaraki's arms were out, and the whole reserve was committed forward and the body was at its emptiest. The moment between charges, the trough, the place where a vessel is nothing but a wire with everything running out of it, putting his left palm flat on Tamura Shigaraki's sternum. The seal took. Then Izuku folded 3 feet to the left. The release went off into the space he had been standing in, and it cratered the plane for 40 meters in every direction, and it took the top 11 meters off the earth, and the sound of it reached Musutafu. And on the ridge, 110 heroes were pushed flat against the ground by a wall of air that carried the smell of scorched clay. When it cleared, Tamura Shigaraki was standing in the middle of a hole with both arms still out and nothing left in him, empty as a fired shell. And a boy in a ruined coat was standing 3 feet to his left with a right hand held out flat and something starting to turn in the palm. Blue-white. Spinning so hard the edges of it were not there, screaming a thin high note like a kettle in another room. The dust for 3 meters around lifted off the ground and started to orbit his wrist. Rasengan? Izuku said, and he said it the way a carpenter says the name of a tool. He put it into Shigaraki's chest. The sound carried to Musutafu. Not the crack of the release, that had already gone. This was lower and worse, a note that people 40 kilometers away described as feeling like a door slamming somewhere inside their own house. The spiraling wind sphere went into the sternum of a body built to hold the power of 100 years, and it did not blow him backward, and it did not knock him down. It stopped the current. That is the only accurate way anybody has ever managed to say it, and it comes from Shigaraki's own statement. The transfer, never fully settled, forced 11 months early into a vessel that had not finished growing around it, broke. Not like a thing breaking, like a current stopping. One instant there was 100 years of stolen power moving through him, and the next instant there was not, and every one of the black-purple lines under his skin went gray and stayed gray. And the thing that had been standing in the crater with its arms out was suddenly only as strong as the man inside it. He went down onto his back in the middle of 40 meters of turned earth and did not get up. The morning came the rest of the way over the ridge. Izuku Midoriya walked to the edge of the crater with his hands empty and the ash coming down out of the sky like something out of a chimney, and he looked into it. Tamura Shigaraki lay on his back with cracks running up both forearms and blood in his teeth and one lung not working properly, and his chest was moving and his eyes were open and they were still red. They looked at each other for a while. "End it," Shigaraki said. It came out wet and it took him 2 breaths to get it out. And he meant it more than he had ever meant anything in his life. And every single person listening on the open channel, 110 heroes on a hill and 2,000 kneeling prisoners and a joint command tent full of people who would spend the next decade arguing about this morning, heard him say it. Izuku crouched down at the crater's edge and he dealt the finishing blow. Then he stood up. He turned around. The ridge was coming down onto the plain. 110 professional heroes walking through the smoke and the turned earth toward the crater in the middle of it. The best in Japan, all of them. Mirko with her ears still flat and Endeavor with his flames out entirely, and Fat Gum carrying his helmet under his arm, and Matt Lady at ordinary size with her boots in the mud, and Kamui Woods, and 13 and Death Arms, and Gran Torino somewhere at the back, moving at the pace of a man who has decided to walk. They stopped when he turned to face them. They stopped about 11 meters out, all of them at the same time, without a word passing between anybody, the way a crowd stops at the edge of something. None of them said anything. Izuku looked at them. He looked at the faces properly, the way he did, one at a time, giving each of them the whole thing for a moment. Men and women who had spent entire careers being the most capable person in any room they walked into, standing in a field covered in fallen enemies in the gold of a sunrise, staring at a 16-year-old boy with ash in his hair and blood on his knuckles that was not his, and one sleeve of his coat still faintly smoking from a forest 3 weeks earlier that he had never gotten around to repairing. Then he bowed, small, sincere. From the waist about 15 degrees, hands at his sides, the exact same bow he gave when he held a door open for someone. The same one he gave a pro hero after taking 11 minutes of their time in a briefing. The same one he had given a receptionist in a commission lobby on his way up to a meeting he had every intention of completely refusing to cooperate with. Then he straightened and put his hands in his pockets and walked off the plain. He went west toward the Ridge Road, past the wreck of a command tent and a public address speaker lying on its side in the mud, and the white coat moved around him in the morning wind, and the light was coming up full now, gold, old, along the whole eastern edge of the world, catching the green of his hair and the gold that ran through it. Behind him, somebody started clapping. One set of hands. Nobody has ever agreed on whose, though 4 people have claimed it, and one of them is definitely lying. Then 2, then a dozen, then 30, 60, 110. A plane full of heroes, standing in the mud and the smoke of the largest engagement in the history of this country, applauding a boy who was walking away from it without turning around, walking away from it the way you walk home from the shops. He did not turn around. He got about 200 meters out and took his phone out of his pocket and dialed. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Mom." Izuku. Her voice was exactly the way her voice always was. There was a radio on somewhere behind it and something in a pan. "You sound tired." "A little." He walked on through the drifting smoke with the phone at his ear. "You home?" "Making breakfast. I'll be there in an hour." He checked the pouch on his hip with 2 fingers without looking. 11 short. He would make them tonight at the desk with the lamp and the file, and it would take him until about 2 in the morning, and he did not mind. "Can you put extra rice in mine?" He heard her laugh, low and warm and completely unbothered by the fact that her son was calling her from a field she had seen on the television 9 minutes ago, because she had been not asking the right questions for 8 years, and she was not going to start now. "I always do." Inko said. I always do. He pocketed the phone. The sky was blue overhead now, the whole thing rising, the gold burning up off the eastern edge. Somewhere in the tree line to his left, a bird was doing something cheerful at length with real commitment, completely unaware of any of this. Fourth Hokage, Izuku said, not out loud, not quite, just inward, hacked to the old and tired and patient thing that had lived in his chest since his first breath in a hospital in Musutafu, the presence that had said, breathe. Mark it to an 8-year-old on a sidewalk with broken eggs at his feet that had run with him through 100 warehouses and 100 burning cities and one cold morning on a plane where the sky had still been unlit at the start. We're done. The presence was warm. It did not say anything. It did not need to. Izuku Midoriya took his hands out of his pockets. He came up off the ridge road onto the highway where a police cordon was standing with their mouths open, and he stepped through them. And one of them said, sir, and he said, good morning, and kept going. And 40 minutes later, he was on a train in a car with 3 other people, all of whom stared at their phones, and then at him, and then at their phones. He got off at Musutafu at 8:11. He walked the last 9 blocks. He stopped at the market on the corner because it was open and because he had 400 yen, and he bought a bag of leeks. And the man at the stand looked at his coat for a long moment and then looked at the leeks and then took the money and said nothing about any of it. He went up the stairs. The door was unlocked, the way it always was on Sunday mornings. The apartment smelled like rice and grilled fish, and the tea she made too strong. And there was a magazine face down on the arm of the sofa, and the news was on with the sound off, showing a wide aerial shot of somewhere else. And she had turned it so it faced the wall. Inko Midoriya was at the counter with her back to the door. Shoes, she said. I know. He took them off. He put the leeks on the counter. She looked at the leeks and then at him, at the coat, at the ash, at the sleeve, at his face. And she reached up and put her hand on his cheek for about 4 seconds, and then took it away and picked up the bowl. She filled it. Then she put more rice in it, the way she had been doing since he was 3 years old. More than one person needs. More than the bowl comfortably held, a small mountain of it. That meant something neither of them had ever once said out loud in 16 years. She set it down at his place at the table. He sat down. He did not say anything about the rice. He ate it.
The hero roster. A massive salute to the legends backing this journey. Your support is what keeps the momentum at an all-time high and the dream moving forward. You guys are the absolute best. Pro heroes. The elite front line. Stepping up and setting the pace for the whole community. DA. Fire 05. Symbol of peace. The pillars of the community. The titans who keep our foundations solid and the hype at an all-time high. Alexander Igarza. That guy Miso. Deck. Lydell Scott Jr. James Martin. Victor Laroux. Rune Brokstad. Ariuse Bryant, Jonah Wheeler, T-Mac, XXHJRX3A7XX, Hyperbeams, Michael Murphy, Grand Region Kell, Sin Hunter, Logan Bland, Alexander Johannes, Alex Morgan, Ray Various, That Other Guy Too, Chad Reynolds, T. Mackie 68 Rimuru, A. Zetros, Dweller of the Deepest Depths, Lone Wolf, Jacob Ropes, Bully Maguire Shadow, Rathakit Thitiratnun Fakul, Neostar Productions, Asael Cardenas, Shaquan Simmons, Thunder, Sunawin 631, Elijah Saunders, Peter Hamilton, Freddie Rose, Omega, Akuma Noakami, Remorsefuls, Black Vein, Joshua Hedrington,
Aaron Abercrombie, Drift SK8ER, Corey Tokars, Jan, Devin Black, Crow, Joe Bros, Ray Von Crimson River, Dante Alastor, Adam Yonkers, Blood Saints, Donna Cafe, Zeph, KC, Howie60, Ignacio.
Hope of the universe, the ultimate guardians, celestial tier supporters whose impact literally shines across the galaxy. Void Rot, Chaos Umbre, Noroi Uzumaki Uchiha, Tyshawn Palmer, Coldbane 4, The Maniac 563, Debs, LS Morningstar, Marl, Spintown, I Shoot X50, Greg Green, James, Q Hon Yen Thompson, Juan, and Zeno KJ. Thanks for watching all the way through. If you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment with your favorite moment and tell me what you want to see next. See you in the next video.